The doors of the Ombric rotunda came apart on their old hinges, and the thing they let in was already fighting the 8 chains that held it. It came low and wide, 6 legs braced against the polished floor, dragging the Surek handlers behind it like men towed through surf. Its back was a ridge of overlapping plates the color of wet iron, and where the plates met at the spine they stood up in a crest that scraped the doorway and left a white gouge in the stone. It did not roar. That was the worst part later when the counselors tried to describe it. A thing that size should have roared. Instead it breathed, a long, wet bellows sound that filled the domed chamber and pressed on the ears like deep water. And it swung its blunt head from tier to tier of the assembled conquered, and every delegate it looked at went still in the particular way small animals go still. Recorder Oru had sat in that chamber for 40 of her years, and she had never once stopped writing. She stopped now. Her stylus hung over the wet clay of the record tablet, and a single drop of ink gathered at its tip and would not fall, and she watched the beast come down the central aisle and thought, with the cold clarity of an old creature who has seen many rooms try to frighten each other, that this was the end of the pretense. For 100 sittings, the Surek ascendancy had brought threats to the conquered dressed as arguments. Now they had stopped dressing them. "Hold it," someone hissed from the ascendancy benches. "Hold it, you fools, until the speaker gives the word." The handlers held it, 6 of them in the gray hide harness of the Surek beast caste, hauling on chains sheathed in ceramic where they ran through rings driven into the beast's plates. A 7th handler walked apart from the rest, and it was this one Oru's eye kept returning to, because he did not haul. He carried a long goad rod tipped with a resonance emitter, and he held it the way a person holds a thing he is ashamed of, and every few steps he touched it to the base of the beast's skull, and the beast shuddered and its breathing hitched, and the chamber flinched with it. Oru wrote 3 words on the tablet before she knew she had moved her hand. She wrote, "They are afraid." She was not certain in that moment whether she meant the handlers or the beast. On the high dais the speaker warden rose. Octal Vresh of the Surek ascendancy was tall even for his kind, a full head above the tallest of his caste, and where lesser Surek wore their crestquills loose, Vresh had his bound in bands of black metal so that they lay flat and gleaming along his skull like a helmet grown out of the body. He wore no armor. He did not need to. He had brought his armor on 8 chains, and he let the chamber look at it for a long, deliberate moment before he spoke. "Conquered of the 9 thresholds," he said. His voice was pleasant. That was another thing the counselors remembered. "I bring an instrument to your deliberations. The 9th of its line. My people breed them from the deep-holed stock of a world I will not name, because the naming of it is a courtesy your conquered has not earned. You may call it what you like. My handlers call it 9. The beast called 9 turned its head toward the sound of his voice and pulled its lips off its teeth, and the teeth were the color of old bone, and there were a great many of them. And Vresh smiled the flat Surek smile that does not reach the eyes because Surek eyes do not move. "For 3 sittings," Vresh went on, "this body has debated the matter of the fringe charter, the right of the outer colonies, the human colonies chief among them, to maintain their own defense fleets outside conquered command. Some of you have spoken warmly of that right." He let his gaze travel along the benches, unhurried, and everywhere it touched, delegates found reasons to look at their own hands. "I have listened to the warmth. I have found it unpersuasive, so I have brought a colder argument." He gestured, and the 7th handler touched the goad to the beast's skull. 9 screamed. It was not the roar the chamber had braced for. It was higher, and it broke in the middle, and it was so plainly a sound of pain that Oru's whole hide crawled with it, and she was certain she saw, the 7th handler's arm shake as he held the rod in place. The beast heaved against the chains. 2 handlers went to their knees. A ceramic sheath cracked with a sound like a snapping bone and a spray of pale sparks, and for 1 heartbeat the great head swung free and low across the front tier, and the delegates of the front tier came up out of their seats as one animal, and pressed back against the ones behind them. And somewhere a counselor made a sound no dignified person once recorded. "That," said Vresh over the noise, "is the argument. You will vote down the fringe charter. You will place the outer fleets under my command where troublesome things can be watched, and 9 will go back into its hold and your fine warm chamber will smell of stone again instead of fear." He sat. He arranged his flat quills with 2 fingers. "Or it will not." "Deliberate." The handlers dragged the beast back a body length and drove a holding stake into a socket in the floor and clamped the chains short. And the beast stood there heaving in the center of the most powerful room in 9 star systems, and the room did not breathe. Oru looked down at her tablet and found she had written a 4th word beneath the first 3. She had written, "Pain. They are afraid. Pain." She looked at the sentence a long time. Then, because she was old and had learned that the truest records are the ones nobody asks you to keep, she pressed her thumb over the words and smeared them into the clay until they were gone, and she folded her hands, and she waited to see what the room would become. Down in the well of the chamber, behind the human delegation's modest 3-seat bench, a young woman was trying to see past the counselor in front of her, and thinking that the poor animal's harness was on wrong. Nell Caro had not been meant to be in the room at all. She was a provisioner, a galley-hand, her mother would have said, with the flat honesty of the frontier, and never mind the polite word the conquered printed on the pass clipped to her collar. Her job for the length of the human delegation's stay was to keep 3 tired diplomats fed and watered, and to make sure the ceremonial water service didn't run dry during the long sittings, because a delegate who has to leave the chamber to relieve a dry throat loses the floor, and the humans could not afford to lose the floor. She had spent the morning steeping tea, the way Envoy held liked it, and carrying the tray in during recess, and carrying it out again, and she had been standing at the service alcove at the back of the human tier, with a covered pot going cold in her hands when the doors came apart and the beast came in. She had not moved. Everyone else in the alcove had gone flat against the wall. Nell had set the pot down on the sideboard carefully so it would not spill, and she had watched the beast come down the aisle, and the first clear thought she had was not fear. It was, someone has that rig cinched 3 holes too tight, and it's been rubbing. She knew harness. She had grown up on a holding at the cold end of a colony world where the only power that plowed and the only power that hauled had 6 legs or 4, and where a beast worked lame or a beast worked sore was a beast that cost you the season, and you learned before you learned your letters to read the language an animal speaks with its skin. She watched the ridge plates lift and settle as the beast breathed, and she saw the place at the base of the crest where the ceramic-sheathed ring had been driven through the plate, and the flesh under it had swollen up around the metal, red-black and shining, weeping at the edges. She saw the beast's head come around every few seconds and reach back toward that spot and stop short, because the plates would not let it turn that far, because no beast built like that could ever reach its own spine. It can't get at it, she thought. Whatever's wrong with it, it can't reach to fix it, and it's been that way a long time. Nell, Envoy held's voice low from the bench. The envoy had turned in her seat. She was a broad, gray woman with a soldier's stillness, and her face right now was carefully arranged into the blankness of a diplomat who has just been threatened and intends to give the threat nothing to feed on. Stay in the alcove. Do not move from the alcove. Yes, ma'am, Nell said. She did not move from the alcove. But she did not look away from the beast, either, and the beast, heaving on its short chains in the center of the room, ignored now by a chamber that had turned to the urgent business of pretending to deliberate, the beast, for reasons Nell would not have been able to explain, began to look back. They gave the conquered an hour to be afraid before they moved to the vote. Recorder Oru watched the hour happen. It happened the way these things always happened. First, the delegations that had already decided to fold looked for a principled way to describe folding and found one, because there is always one. The Delvish spoke gravely of the primacy of collective security. The Ashari spoke of prudence in the face of demonstrated capability, which was a long way of saying they had seen the teeth. One by one the benches that had, a day earlier, spoken warmly of the outer colony's right to keep their own ships, discovered new coldness in themselves, and the coldness spread the way cold does, from the edges in. The human envoy asked for the floor twice. Twice the speaker warden granted it, with the lazy generosity of someone who has already won, and twice the envoy stood and spoke plainly about the difference between an argument and a weapon, and twice the beast in the center of the room heaved on its chains at exactly the moment the envoy reached her point, and the chamber's attention broke like a dropped cup. The third time she rose, the speaker warden did not even bother to deny her. He simply looked at the seventh handler, and the handler looked at the goat in his hands, and did not lift it, and there was a small strange pause. Oru marked it. Oru marked everything. Before a different handler took the rod from him and touched it to the beast, and the beast screamed, and the envoy sat down without speaking. "It appears," said the speaker warden into the ringing quiet, "that the human position has exhausted itself. Let the recorder note the motion. The fringe charter is to be struck. The outer fleets are to be." "That handler's going to lose his hand," said a voice from the human tier. It was not a loud voice. It did not try to be. It carried the way a plain, true thing carries in a room that has been listening to lies for an hour, and every head in the conquered turned toward it, and Oru's stylus finally let its drop of ink fall, unnoticed, onto the record. The young human, the small one, the one nobody had bothered to place, the one who had been carrying the water, had come to the low rail at the front of the human tier. She was not looking at the speaker warden. She was looking at the beast, and she was frowning, the ordinary frown of a person watching another person do a job badly. "Silence in the well," the Surex sergeant-at-arms barked. "He keeps putting the goad on the swelling," the human said to no one, to everyone, in the tone of a woman pointing out that a cart is about to lose a wheel. "That's why it's screaming and not charging. It's not being made angry. It's being hurt somewhere it's already hurt. You do that to a working beast long enough, and one day it stops screaming and just takes your arm off, and it won't even be its fault." She looked up then and found the speaker warden, and Oru saw the exact moment the young woman realized how many people were watching her and saw her decide, visibly, the way the young decide things, all at once and with their whole face, not to care. "Your rig's on wrong," she said to him. "That's all. Your rig's on wrong, and your animal's in pain, and everybody in here is calling it a monster because that's easier than fixing the buckle." For the length of 3 breaths, the Ombric rotunda was more silent than Oru had heard it in 40 years. Then the speaker warden laughed. It was a good performance. Oru gave him that. He threw his bound quills back and made the flat barking sound that passes for laughter among the Surak, and after a moment his benches took it up, because that is what benches do, and the laughter rolled around the great dome and came back thin. "The human," Vresh said, when he had wrung the moment for all it would give, "the human galley servant wishes to instruct the ascendancy in the handling of war beasts. How fortunate we are! Tell me, little provisioner," and he leaned forward, and the pleasantness went out of his voice and left something older and colder underneath it, "would you like to fix the buckle yourself?" Nell, envoy held, was on her feet. "Speaker warden, my staff is not part of these." "The invitation is extended," Vresh said, "and cannot now be withdrawn without the human tier conceding that its own words were empty. That is the courtesy of this conquered, is it not, recorder?" He did not look at Oru. He did not need to. He knew the forms as well as she did. A challenge spoken in open session, accepted or refused in open session, and a refusal was a forfeiture of the point of the floor, of the last shred of standing the human colonies had brought into the room. "Come down, little provisioner, fix the buckle. 9 has not eaten since the crossing. I am sure it will hold very still for you." And the horror of it, Oru thought, watching the young human's face, The true horror of it was that the girl was not looking at the speaker warden at all anymore. She had already stopped listening to him. She was looking at the beast, and doing the small unconscious arithmetic of someone who has decided to do a hard thing and is now only working out where to put her feet. "Nell, no," said Envoy Held very quietly in the human tongue so that only the tear could hear. "This is a killing. He's arranging a killing and calling it a courtesy. You don't owe him that. We'll take the forfeiture. We'll take the whole charter. You do not walk down there." Nell Caro looked at the old soldier who had been kind to her for the length of a long, cold voyage, and something in her face was sorry, and something in it was already gone down the steps ahead of her. "Envoy," she said, "I've handled meaner than that with a sore back and a bad buckle. He's not a monster. He's just nobody's ever been kind to him where he could feel it." She unclipped the pass from her collar and set it on the bench, the way you set down a thing you don't want to lose in what comes next. "And I'm not going to stand up here and watch them hurt him to scare you, when the fixing of it is right there." She went down the steps into the Well of the Conquered and every predator species in the chamber, and there were many, for the Conquered was full of old hunting bloodlines wearing the manners of civilization like a coat that did not quite fit. Every one of them felt the same thing at the same time, and did not have a word for it, and would spend the rest of the sitting trying to find one. The small, unfrightened animal was walking toward the large, frightened one, and the large one had gone still. The beast that the Surak called Nine did not think in words, but it knew the room the way it knew all rooms now, as a place full of the smell of fear, which had long ago stopped meaning food and started meaning only that the hurting was near. It had learned the smell early. In the deep hold where it had been whelped, the smell of fear had been the smell of the handlers, and the handlers had been the source of the rod, and the rod was the whole world's edge, the thing past which there was nothing but white noise and the sense of one's own body betraying one. It had learned that the rod came when the great room of many smells wanted it to move, and it had learned to move because moving made the rod stop. It did not hate the handlers. Hate was too clean a thing. It simply understood them the way a stone understands the river, as the shape of the force that wore it down. There was the itch. There was always the itch. Under the third plate from its skull, where the ring had been driven, the flesh had grown up hot and wrong around the metal, and it sang with a low, steady wrongness that never stopped, waking or sleeping, and it could not reach it. It had tried. In the early time it had ground its spine against the walls of the hold until it wore the walls smooth, and wore its own plates dull, and never once touched the place that needed touching, because the place that needed touching was the one place on the whole long map of its body that its own jaws and its own feet could never find. That was the particular cruelty of how it was made. The thing that hurt worst was the thing it could reach least. In the end it had stopped trying, the way one stops trying, and folded the wrongness into the general noise of being alive in the deep hold. And only sometimes, when the rod woke the whole spine at once, did the itch flare up into something that made it want to open its jaws on the world. Now there was a new smell in the room. It came down the steps toward it, small and slow, and the beast swung its head to find the source, and its whole body braced for the fear smell that always rode ahead of things that approached it. And the fear smell was not there. That was wrong. That had never happened. Everything that came near it stank of fear, the handlers most of all, and the fear had become part of what it expected the world to be, so that its absence was a kind of silence, a hole in the noise, and the beast went still around that hole the way an animal goes still at the edge of a sound it cannot place. The small thing kept coming. It smelled of warm water and dried leaves and its own plain self, and under that it smelled, the beast worked at this, its slow, deep mind turning it over, it smelled of other beasts, working beasts, the smell that clings to a body that has spent its life close against the flanks of large animals. It was a smell the beast had never met in a Surak, and had never expected to meet again anywhere, because it belonged to the before time, the whelping time, The warm dark it could no longer quite remember and had stopped reaching for. The small thing stopped an arm's length from its foreleg and made a low sound in its throat. Not a command. The beast knew commands. Commands were the shapes the rod made in the air. This was not that. This was the sound a large animal makes to a nervous one across the dark of a shared pen. The low nothing sound that means only I am here and I am not going to do the thing you are braced for. The beast, which had been braced for the thing every waking hour of its life, did not know what to do with a body that was not going to do the thing. So it did nothing. It stood and it breathed its long, wet breath, and it let the small, unfrightened thing come. Down on the floor of the well, Nell had run out of easy steps. The last of them put her inside the reach of the beast, close enough to feel the heat coming off it in waves, and to smell the deep sour reek of an animal that had been kept too long in its own filth, and close enough now to see the swelling under the crest properly, and it was worse than she'd thought. The ring had been driven straight through the living plate, through the quick of it, and around the wound the flesh had gone the color of a wee-cold bruise and split in 3 places and crusted and split again. There were older scars layered under the new hurt, a history of the same wound made and remade, and she understood, looking at it, that this was not an accident of a bad buckle. This was where they always put it. This was the handle they had built into the animal on purpose, the place they could always find, the place it could never guard. Something went hard and level in her chest. It was not fear. She had known fear on the holding, real fear, the night the drift cats came over the north fence, and this was not that. This was the thing that came after fear when fear had nowhere to go, a cold, flat steadiness, the feeling of a person who has decided. "Hey," she said low in the human tongue, which the beast could not understand and did not need to. "Hey, big man, I see it. I know. I know." Behind her, the chamber had stopped even pretending to deliberate. 1,000 eyes. She felt them on her back like a change in the weather, and she let them go. The way you let go of the crowd at a fair when the beast in front of you needs all of you. And she lifted her hand, slowly, palm open, from below, the way you always came at a spooked animal, never over the top of the head where the shape of your hand looks like a raptor coming down. And she laid it flat against the beast's foreleg, on the warm, dry hide below the plates, where a nervous animal likes to be touched, because it can see your arm the whole way in. The beast flinched. The whole vast body of it jerked, and a sound went around the chamber, and up on the dais the speaker warden came half out of his seat with something bright in his flat eyes. Then the beast did not do the thing. It stood. It trembled. She could feel the tremor coming up through her palm, the deep muscular shudder of an animal holding itself still against every instinct it owned. But it stood, and it turned its blunt head down and around as far as the plates would let it, until one deep-set eye the size of her 2 fists together was looking at her sidelong, and Nell looked back into it and did not blink, and did not smile, because you never smile at a frightened animal. A smile is teeth. And she kept her hand flat and warm on its leg, and waited for it to remember how to breathe. "There," she murmured. "There. Nobody's doing anything, just me, just my hand, you know my hand now, that's all we're doing." She slid the hand up, slow, along the shoulder over the seam where the first plate began, reading the animal with her fingers the way she'd read 100 sore working beasts on 100 cold mornings. "Is it here? Is it here?" "No," up, over, and the beast's breath came shorter and its trembling grew. But it did not pull away. It leaned a fraction, a hand's width. It leaned its terrible weight the smallest amount toward her touch, and Nell felt the leaning and knew she had it. "Yeah," she breathed. "Yeah, that's it. Where's it hurt, big man? Show me where it." Her fingers found the base of the crest and the edge of the swelling, and she felt the beast go rigid, and she did not press the wound. She was not a fool. She pressed the good hide beside it, above it, the ordinary itching skin along the spine that had gone untouched for the whole of the animal's life, because nothing in the world could reach it, and she dug her fingers in and scratched. The beast made a sound no one in the Ombric Rotunda had ever heard. Recorder Aru would try to render it in the record for the rest of her life and never get it right. It was low. It came up out of the deep barrel of the beast's chest and rolled out through the dome, and it was the resonant bell note of an enormous body letting go of something it had been holding for years. And it was, unmistakably, to every creature in that chamber who had ever kept a pet or soothed a child or been, themselves, once, an animal that another animal was kind to, it was the sound of relief. The great head dropped. The crest, which had stood up rigid and scraping since the doors came apart, sank and spread. The 6 legs shifted wide and settled, and the whole mountain of the beast lowered itself, a hand's width toward the small human scratching its back, and its eye half closed, and it made the bell note again, longer, and leaned into her hand with a slow, helpless pressure that would have crushed her if she had not known to brace her hip against its foreleg and let the weight of it come. "Easy," Nell said, laughing now, a little breathless, both hands working the ridge of the spine now, digging into the long-starved skin. "Easy, you great worry, I'm not going anywhere. Look at you. Look at you. Somebody just needed a good scratch and everybody thought you wanted a war." In the whole vast chamber, no one spoke. On the ascendancy benches, the flat Surex smiles had gone somewhere else. And in the pit, apart from the other handlers, the 7th handler, the one who had held the goad and not lifted it, stood with the rod loose in his hands and watched the beast he had hurt every day for 2 years lean into a stranger's palm and sing. And he found that his own throat had closed, and he did not know why, and he was very much afraid that he did. Rehel of the beast caste had handled 9, since it was brought up out of the deep hold, as a whelp the size of a hunting hound. He had been young then, low even among the low, and the assignment had been a punishment. The beast caste was where the ascendancy put the sons of failed lines, and the 9th instrument was where the beast caste put the ones it wanted to break. He had not expected to survive the year. The 8th instrument had killed 4 handlers before the ascendancy decided its temperament was unstable, and had it destroyed. And Rehel had walked into the hold expecting the 9th to finish what the 8th had started, and had found instead a whelp already learning the lesson of the rod, already flinching, already folding itself smaller in the corner of the hold as if it could make itself too small to hurt. He had been ordered to drive the first ring through its plate himself. It was how the beast caste taught its own, you made the wound, so you understood the handle, so you would never forget where it was. He remembered the sound the whelp had made. He remembered telling himself it was only a beast. He had gone on telling himself that for 2 years, through every rod touch and every short chaining and every crossing spent in the reeking dark of the hold, because the alternative to it being only a beast was unbearable, and Rehel was a coward, and he knew he was a coward, and he had made a kind of peace with knowing it. Now the human had her hands in the beast's ruined spine, and the beast was singing, and every lie Rehel had told himself for 2 years was coming apart at once. It had never wanted to kill anyone. He saw that now with a clarity that felt like the rod turned inward. It had never been a weapon that needed restraining. It had been an animal in pain that lashed out at the source of the pain, and the source of the pain had always been them, the rod, the ring, the hands that drove the metal home, and the thing the ascendancy had spent a fortune breeding and a caste's worth of lives handling was not a monster at all. It was a hurt animal that had been made to look like a monster, because a hurt animal that can be pointed at your enemies is worth more than any true monster, which cannot be aimed. And a human galley servant had walked down into the well of the conquered, and undone it in the space of 100 breaths, with an open hand. "Handler," the speaker warden's voice came down from the dais, low and even, and Rehel felt it land on the back of his neck like a cold hand. "The instrument is being interfered with. Correct it." Rehel looked at the rod in his hands. He looked at the beast, at 9, at the animal he had wounded as a whelp and wounded every day since, leaning its great scarred head down toward a stranger's murmuring, its eye closed, its breath for the first time in Rehel's memory coming slow and easy and unafraid. He looked at the human, who had glanced up at the sound of Vresh's voice, and then, deliberately, gone back to what she was doing, as if the speaker warden of the Surak ascendancy were a fly she had decided not to swat. "Handler," Vresh said again, and now there was iron in it. "You will apply the goad. That is not a request I am accustomed to making twice." The other 6 handlers had gone still. The whole chamber had gone still. And Rahel, who had been a coward for 2 years, who had made his peace with cowardice, felt the peace break under him like rotten ice, and understood that he was about to do the bravest and the most foolish thing of his small life, and that he was going to do it anyway, and that it was almost a relief. He set the goad rod down on the floor of the well. He set it down carefully, the emitter unpowered, the way you set down a tool you are finished with, and he straightened, and he said, in a voice that shook and did not stop, "No, Speaker Warden, I've corrected it enough." The word went out over the Concord like a stone into still water, and the rings of it kept spreading long after the sound was gone. The Speaker Warden did not shout. Recorder Oru noted that too. A lesser creature would have shouted, and shouting would have been a mercy, because shouting is a thing a room can forgive. Vresh only turned his flat, unmoving eyes on the handler who had set down the rod, and let the silence do the work, and when he spoke his voice was as pleasant as it had been at the start. "Handler Rahel," he said, "you are relieved of your caste. You will be dealt with under ascendancy law when we return to the ships. Step away from the instrument." "It isn't an instrument," Rahel said. His voice still shook. He did not step away. "It's a grail. That's the word for what it is. I looked it up once in the hold on a slate I wasn't supposed to have. Its own kind called it a grail. It means the translation was bad, but it means something like the one who carries." They were pack carriers, Speaker Warden. They carried their whelps and their old ones and their dead. That's what we bred the killing into. That's what we... "Step away," said Vresh, "from the instrument." And here, Oru thought, was the hinge of the whole afternoon, the moment on which everything after it would turn. Because the Speaker Warden had given an order twice, and twice it had not been obeyed, and a power that must give an order 3 times in front of witnesses is no longer quite a power. Vresh knew it. Oru could see that he knew it. The whole architecture of the Ascendancy's afternoon had rested on the beast being a thing that answered, instantly, to Surak will, and the beast was ignoring him to lean on a galley servant's shoulder, and now a handler of his own caste was ignoring him too, and the arithmetic of the room was changing while everyone watched, the way a tide changes, without any single moment you can point to. Speaker Warden. Envoy held had risen again in the human tier, and this time no one goaded a beast to drown her out, because the handler who would have done it was standing in the well with his rod on the floor. "You offered my provisioner the chance to fix your buckle. She's fixing it. Perhaps the conquered might extend her the courtesy of finishing the work, before we discuss anyone's relief of caste." A sound moved through the benches. It was very small. It was the sound of a great many delegates who had spent the afternoon being afraid, discovering that they were also, now, a little amused, and that the amusement was aimed for the first time all day not at the human tier, but at the ascendancy dais. Oru had heard that sound in the conquered perhaps 4 times in 40 years. It was the most dangerous sound a chamber could make, and it could not be unmade, and the Speaker Warden heard it and understood exactly what it meant. Down in the well, Nell Caro had heard none of it. She had heard the shape of Vresh's anger and the shape of the handler's refusal, but the words had gone past her, because she had both hands buried to the wrist in the ridge of a beast the size of a grain hauler, and the beast was doing the thing sore animals do when the itch they have carried for years finally gets scratched. It had begun, helplessly, to try to help. Its hind leg had come up and was making small, aborted paddling motions in the air, the way a dog's leg goes when you find the spot, and every so often the great body would shift and represent a new stretch of untended spine to her hands, turning itself under her touch, dumb and trusting, and utterly given over, and Nell was murmuring a steady stream of low nothing at it, and had tears standing in her eyes that she was too busy to be embarrassed by. "There's more of it here," she said to Rahel, because Rahel was the nearest person and had the look of someone who would know. "Under this back plate. Feel that. No, don't, he doesn't know you yet, he'll spook. But feel where there's grit worked in under the plate, sand or grit. It's been in there so long it's gone hard. That's half of what's driving him mad. When did anyone last get under these plates and clean him?" Rahel stared at her. "Never," he said. Nobody gets under the plates. That's where you can't reach an instrument's plates. It would take your—" "Well, somebody's got to," Nell said, "or he's going to carry this the rest of his life." And she said it in exactly the tone of a woman on a cold holding morning, informing the men that the north pump has frozen again, and standing about admiring it won't thaw it. And Rahel, 2 years a coward and 1 minute a rebel, found himself kneeling down in the well of the conquered of the 9 thresholds beside a human, and putting his own scarred hand slowly where she showed him. On the flank of the beast he had spent his life afraid of. The beast turned its head. Rahel froze. The great eye found the specific smell of him, the handler smell, the rod smell, the smell that had meant pain every day of its life. And Rahel waited to die and did not particularly mind, and the beast looked at him for a long moment out of that deep and unreadable eye. Then it looked back at the human, and made its low bell note and leaned, and let him stay. "He knows you," Nell said quietly. "Course he does, but he's watching me not be scared of you. That's how it works. They take it off each other. You be gentle with me and steady, and he'll decide you're all right because I've decided you're all right. That's the whole trick. There's no other trick." She glanced up at him, this ruined young man of a species that had come to the conquered to frighten it, and her face was not unkind. "You did this to him." "Yes," Rahel said. There was no point in anything but yes. "And you stopped. Just now today." "Then start being the one who stopped," Nell said, "and quit being the one who did it." And she went back to the plates, and Rahel knelt in the well with his hands full of the animal he had wounded, and something in his chest that had been clenched for 2 years came loose, and he did not make a sound, but the beast felt it come off him, the fierce smell thinning, the sour edge of it fading, and it sighed a long sigh through its whole enormous body, and settled the smallest degree more. Up on the dais, the speaker warden made his second mistake. The first had been the challenge. He could perhaps have recovered from the first. The second was unrecoverable, and Oru watched him make it and understood that he made it because he had no other move on the board, because a predator that has built its hole standing on being the most frightening thing in the room cannot survive the room deciding it is no longer afraid, and will do anything, to make the room afraid again. "There is a second instrument," Vresh said, "aboard my flagship." The amusement went out of the benches like a lamp blown out. The 8th slittermate, larger than 9. Untouched by this display, he rose and his flat quills caught the light and his voice was pleasant no longer. It had gone down into the register the Surak used, Oru knew, only for the giving of sentences. "The human has shown the conquered a trick with a wounded animal, very moving. Let us see the trick performed on a well one. Bring up the 10th. Speaker Warden, one of his own delegation, a smaller Surak in the robes of the Ascendancy's legal caste, had leaned in close and was speaking low and fast. Oru could not hear the words. She could read the shape of them. Not here, not in open session. The forms. And she could read, too, the exact moment Vresh stopped listening to them, because he straightened and set his aide aside with one hand, and looked out over the conquered with the expression of a creature who has decided that if he cannot win the room he will at least command it through its fear one more time. "Bring up the 10th, he said again. "Let the recorder note that the demonstration was requested by the human tier's own champion. Let us see how she handles a beast that has never known the rod's correction, a beast at the full black flower of what my people can make. Bring it up." And Oru, who had smeared 4 true words into wet clay an hour ago, took up her stylus, and wrote in the formal script of the record the thing the forms required her to write. And beneath the desk, where no one could see, she pressed her old thumb hard against her own knee, once, the way her people did when they prayed, though her people had given up their gods a long age ago and kept only the gesture, for moments exactly like this one. The 10th came up out of the flagship's hold and into the Concord an hour later, and it was everything the speaker warden had promised. Where 9 was scarred and sagging and sour with neglect, the 10th was glory turned to a weapon. It came through the great doors under no chains at all. That was the display. That was the whole terrible point of it. A beast so perfectly conditioned it needed no restraint, flanked by 12 handlers walking in a wedge with their goad rods held high and humming. And it moved among them the way a blade moves in a master's hand, contained, unhurried, aware. Its plates were black and polished and edged with a hard blue sheen, and the crest along its spine stood up in a clean, unbroken saw, and it was, Oru judged, half again the size of 9, and it swung its head across the tiers of the Concord, and where 9's gaze had carried pain, the 10th's carried nothing at all, which was infinitely worse. The chamber which had begun to unclench, clenched again all at once, and clenched harder, because a room that has just let itself hope is a room with much further to fall. "You see the difference," said Vresh, and the pleasantness was back in his voice now that the fear was back in the room, poured over the whole scene like warm oil. "The one your provisioner petted is spoiled stock, a failure. This is the instrument as it is meant to be, perfect obedience, perfect readiness." He turned his dead gaze down into the well where Nell had risen slowly to her feet beside 9, one hand still resting on the old beast's leg. "Go on, little provisioner, the Concord is watching. Fix this one's buckle." Nell looked at the 10th for a long moment. She looked at it the way Oru had seen frontier folk look at weather coming over a ridge, not with fear, exactly, but with respect, with the flat assessing attention of someone measuring a real danger and deciding what it will cost. And then she did a thing that Oru would think about for the rest of her long life. She turned her back on the 10th. She turned her back on the perfect black killing animal that had come up out of the flagship to end her, and she crouched down again beside the old scarred beast at her feet, and she went back to cleaning the grit out from under its plates. "No," she said. "No," Vresh leaned forward. "No," Nell said again, not looking up. "That one's not sore, that one's not scared. That one's not asking me for anything." She worked a packed clot of old grit loose from under 9's plate and flicked it away, and the old beast groaned its bell groan and pressed into her. "You didn't bring that one up here so I could help it. You brought it up here to kill me in front of everybody so they'd forget they just watched your monster turn into a big soft dog. I'm not going to help you do that. I'm going to finish taking care of this one. That's the job I've got." She glanced up then and found Vresh's eyes and held them, one plain human girl and one speaker warden of the Surak ascendancy, across the whole silent well of the Concord. "You want that thing to hurt somebody, you're going to have to be the one to point it at them, out loud, in front of all these people. Go on." It was, Oru would write later in the true record, the one she kept for herself, the bravest thing she ever saw done in that chamber, and the girl did not seem to know she was being brave. She seemed only to be being stubborn, in the particular way of people raised where the animals must be cared for whether or not it is convenient, whether or not it is safe, because the caring for them is not a thing you get to stop doing when you are frightened. And Vresh, cornered, exposed, with the whole Concord watching and the amusement threatening to come back into the benches and curdle into something worse, Vresh pointed the 10th at her. "Instrument," he said, "the human. Kill it." The 12 handlers dropped their humming rods, and the 10th came off its haunches, and crossed the well of the Concord in 3 strides that shook grit down from the ancient dome, black and silent, and utterly without pause, straight at the crouching girl who had not even turned to look at it. And the old scarred beast the ascendancy called 9, the failure, the spoiled stock, the one who carries, came up off the floor over the top of her like a mountain deciding to move, and met it. They came together in the center of the Concord with a sound like two ships colliding in dock, and the whole ancient dome rang with it, and dust that had lain in the vaults since before the human colonies were founded sifted down through the shafts of light and hung there. And Recorder Oru gripped the edge of her desk and did not look away, because it was her office not to look away. 9 was older. 9 was smaller. 9 had spent its life in a reeking hold with a ring rotting in its spine and a grit-packed itch driving it half-mad, and it had never in that whole life fought another of its kind, because there had been no other of its kind to fight. The 10th was younger and larger and honed to a killing edge, and it fought the way the Surak had made it fight, without heat and without mercy, driving in low for the soft place under the jaw where a grail's plates gave way to throat. And 9 did not fight it back. That was the thing Oru could not at first make sense of. The old beast did not strike. It did not go for the throat. It only put itself in the way again, and again, and again, heaving its scarred bulk between the 10th and the small crouched human, taking the black beast's driving weight on its own shoulder, on its own flank, on the ridge of its own ruined spine, and folding down over the girl each time it was knocked back, curling its body around her the way, Oru would later learn, the Grail had once curled around their whelps and their old ones and their dead. It was not fighting to win. It had no idea how to fight to win. It was doing the one thing its kind had been built for before the Surak built the killing into them. It was carrying. It was shielding. It was refusing with its whole battered body to let the small warm thing under it be reached. Get her out of there. Envoy held was over the rail of the human tier and halfway down into the well, and 2 of the Ascendancy's guard moved to stop her, and Oru saw the old soldier put one of them on the floor with an economy of motion that suggested the human envoy had not always been an envoy. Nell, Nell, come to my voice, come now. But Nell Caro was not listening to the envoy either. She had a fistful of the old beast's hide in each hand and her face pressed to the heaving wall of its flank, and she was talking to it, low and steady and unbroken, under the thunder of the 2 beasts and the roar of the appalled chamber. And though not one soul in the Concord could hear the words, every soul in the Concord could see what the words were doing, because each time the old beast staggered, and each time it took another driving blow, the small human's voice went into it and the old beast steadied and set its feet and stayed between her and the dark, and did not break, and did not run, and did not fall. That's the one who carries, Rahel said. He had said it to no one. He was on his feet in the well with the discarded goad rod back in his hands. He had snatched it up without deciding to, and he was staring at the 2 beasts with his whole ruined face open. That's what it means. That's what it means. She woke it up. 2 years I had it in a hold and I couldn't. She scratched its back and she woke up the whole thing we bred out of it. And then Rahel of the beast caste did the second bravest and second most foolish thing of his small life. He turned and he ran, not away from the beasts but toward the 12 handlers of the 10th, waving the dead rod over his head and shouting in the fast guttural cant of the beast caste, the private tongue the Ascendancy had never bothered to learn, because it was only the language of the ones who did the dirty work. It's a grail, it's carrying. Look at it, look at what the old one's doing, you've all seen it, you've all seen a grail carry, don't tell me you haven't, that's not a fight, that's a mother. That's every mother we ever put a ring in, put your rods down, put them down. We are not doing this one, not in front of the whole sky. Later, no one could say exactly how many of the 12 put their rods down first. Oru's record, the formal one, says simply that the handling detail of the 10th instrument ceased to command the beast. What that dry line does not carry is the sight of it, grown Surak warriors of the beast caste, the sons of failed lines, the ones the Ascendancy used and threw away, standing in the well of the Concord with their goad rods lowering one by one, some of them weeping in the flat, tearless way of their kind, all of them looking at the old scarred beast folding itself over a human girl and seeing, Oru did not doubt, every beast they had ever ringed, and every ring they had ever driven. And the whole long weight of the work they had told themselves, was only work. The 10th drove in one more time. And 9, bleeding now from a dozen places, its ruined crest hanging half-torn from its spine, did not rise to meet it. It only lowered its great head over the girl and braced, and waited for the blow, and made. Oru heard it. The whole chamber heard it. Over everything, it made the low bell note. The relief note. The sound it had made when the human first scratched its back. It made that sound now, with a killing weight bearing down on it, because the human was under it, and safe, and its hands were in its hide. And whatever the Surak had done to its body, they had never reached this, the deep place where being with its person was worth more than not being hurt. The 10th stopped. It stopped a hand's breadth from the old beast's lowered skull, its own black bulk shuddering with arrested motion, and it stood there over the two of them, the old grail, the small human, and it swung its head down and it smelled them. Oru saw its nostrils work. She saw the deep, unreadable eye, which had carried nothing at all when it entered the chamber, taken the sight of one of its own kind curled in the ancient carrying posture around a warm and unafraid small thing. And she saw something move behind that eye. She did not have a word for it. She was not sure any language in the conquered had a word for it. The moment a made thing remembers what it was made from, the moment the black flower the Surak had grown in it cracked and showed, underneath, the pack carrier they had planted it in. The 10th lifted its head. It looked slowly at the 12 handlers standing with their lowered rods. It looked at the weeping Rahul. It looked, last and longest, up at the high dais, at the tall, bound-quilled figure of the speaker-warden of the Surak ascendancy, who had spoken the word kill and been, for the first time in the memory of anyone present, disobeyed by both of his instruments at once. And it made no sound at all. It simply turned and walked away from the girl it had been ordered to kill, and lay down in the center of the conquered of the 9 thresholds with a heavy final motion, folding its perfect black bulk down onto the ancient stone, and put its blunt head on its forelegs, and closed its eyes, in the posture of a beast that has decided it is off duty and will not be coming back on. For the second time that afternoon, the most powerful room in 9 star systems had no idea what to do. Counselor Ondasa of the Viharal rose first. Oru had known Ondasa 40 years, and had never once seen the old raptor-jawed counselor move to speak out of turn. The Viharal were an ancient hunting people who had traded their killing for law, 1,000 years past, and held to the law the way converts hold to a faith, and Ondasa was the driest and most correct of them all. He rose now without recognition from the chair, which was itself a scandal, and the chamber fell quiet for him, and he looked down into the well at the 2 beasts and the girl, and he said, in the formal conquered tongue, slowly, "When my people put down the hunt and took up the law, we told ourselves we had become something higher. We told our whelps that the killing was behind us, that we had climbed up out of the blood into the light of reason." He paused. His old throat worked. "I have sat in this chamber for 100 sittings and watched the ascendancy bring its blood back into the light and call it strategy, and I have said nothing, because I am old and the law is slow, and I told myself the forms would hold. And a human child who cannot even take a seat in this body has just shown me, in the space of an afternoon, the difference between climbing up out of the blood and only learning to carry it quietly." He turned his ancient head, deliberately, toward the ascendancy dais. "I am ashamed. I am ashamed that it took a servant with a sore-backed animal to show a chamber full of predators what mercy looks like when it is not afraid. Let the recorder note that the delegate of the Viharal withdraws his silence." He sat, and the sound that went through the conquered then was not the dangerous amusement of before. It was lower and it was graver, and it moved from bench to bench like a thing catching, and Oru, whose office it was to note such things, understood that she was watching a room change its mind, which is the rarest event in politics, and the one the forms are least able to produce, and that it was changing its mind not because it had been out-argued, but because it had been shown, by a small, unfrightened person doing a plain, kind thing, the size of its own long cowardice. Down in the well, Nell Caro lifted her head from the old beast's flank, and looked at the blood on her hands, which was the beast's and not her own, and looked up at the appalled and shifting chamber as if seeing it for the first time, and said, into the enormous quiet, in a voice gone thin with the aftermath of fear she had been too busy to feel until now. He's hurt bad. I need clean water, and I need somebody to help me get this ring out of his back before it kills him, and I need all of you to stop looking at me like that, because it's making him nervous, and he's had about enough of being looked at for one lifetime. No one moved for a moment. Then Recorder Aru, 40 years in her seat, keeper of the record, who had smeared 4 true words into wet clay that morning, because she did not believe the room deserved them. Recorder Aru set down her stylus and rose, and came down out of the recorder's box into the well of the conquered of the 9 thresholds, and said, I will bring the water, and when I bring it. Getting the ring out of the old beast's spine took the better part of an hour, and in that hour the conquered of the 9 thresholds stopped being a council and became, briefly, and without any vote being taken on the matter, a barn. Nell ran it the way her mother had run the calving shed on the bad spring nights. She sent the Delvish delegate, who had spoken so gravely of collective security, off to find lamp oil and clean rag, and the Delvish delegate went, robes hiked up, glad past speaking to have a task that was not fear. She had 2 of the tent's own handlers holding the lamps close and steady, and she had Rahel at the beast's head with both scarred hands flat on its jaw, and his voice going into it low and constant, and she had Recorder Aru kneeling in the well with a basin of clean water that she refreshed, and she had, standing an arm's length back with the stillness of an old soldier who knows the difference between helping and being underfoot, envoy held, watching her provisioner work and saying nothing at all. It's fused, Nell said, not looking up, her fingers working at the swollen root of the ring where it went down into the plate. They drove it through green and let the flesh grow up around it, so it's grown into him, and if I just haul on it I'll take half his spine with it. I need to cut the flesh away from the metal first and lift it out clean. Somebody give me a blade. A good one. Not a saw, a blade, sharp, the sharpest thing in this room. There was a pause. Then Counselor Ondesav the Viharo came down out of his tier, and knelt, old joints and all, in the well beside her, and drew from a sheath at his belt a knife that was plainly older than the human colonies, a hunting blade of dark folded metal, the last honest weapon of an ancient predator people who had put down the hunt 1,000 years before, and he laid it across his 2 palms and offered it to her handle first, and he said gravely, It has not cut in 900 years. My grandsire carried it out of the last hunt. I can think of no worthier blood to wake it than this. And then, because even the Viharo could not entirely resist the moment, he added, with the driest possible dignity, Do not tell the other counselors I let a human galley servant use the ancestral edge to lance a boil. The Viharo have a reputation to consider. I won't tell anybody anything, said Nell, taking the knife, testing its edge against her thumb and finding it after 900 years still keen enough to shave with, except that you've got good steel and a steady hand. Hold his head, Rahel. Here we go, big man, here we go. This is the bad part and then it's over. I promise you it's over after this. She cut. The old beast screamed once, the high broken scream the whole chamber had heard at the start of the afternoon, the sound that had made a room full of predators press back in their seats. And then Nell had her other hand flat on the untended spine beside the wound, scratching, digging in, giving the animal something on the good side of its body to feel that was not the knife. And the scream broke and dropped and became, impossibly, the bell note, wavering. And the beast held still under the blade, because the human's other hand was telling it, in the only language that had ever reached it, that this hurt was a different kind of hurt, a hurt with a person on the far side of it who was not going to leave. And that, Recorder Aru would write, was the moment the doctrine was born, though no one in the well knew it yet. Up in the high tiers, the predator delegations of the conquered, and there were many, the raptor-jawed Viharl and the great cat Ashari and the trench-mawed Delvish and a dozen bloodlines older and stranger, had leaned forward as one to watch the human's two hands do their opposite work, the one cutting and the one comforting. And among those old hunting peoples, a thing was passing that had nothing to do with politics. Oru heard the Ashari delegate murmur at first, to her aide, in a voice thick with a feeling the great cats rarely showed. Look how she does it. One hand takes the pain and the other hand stays. So the beast knows the pain is not the whole of you. And the aide wrote it down, because that is what aides do. And by the end of the sitting it had a name. And by the end of the cycle the name had spread to 4 delegations. And within the year, the warrior orders of 3 separate predator peoples would be teaching their initiates a principle they called the unafraid hand. That you may not raise your hand to a creature in only one way. That the hand that must sometimes cut must also be the hand that stays. And that a hand which only ever cuts has failed the whole of what a hand is for. The Ashari would carve it over the door of their war college. The Viharal would work it into the oath a magistrate swore. None of them would ever entirely agree on what it meant, and all of them would trace it correctly to an afternoon in the Ombric Rotunda, when a human whose name most of them never learned kept one hand scratching a beast's back while the other hand cut a ring of iron out of its spine. Nell Caro, who coined no doctrine and meant none, would have been baffled to hear it. She was only doing the thing you do. You do not stop touching the animal just because you have to hurt it. Any fool who has ever cared for a beast knows that. She would never quite understand why the whole sky decided it was wisdom. The ring came free with a wet grinding wrench, and Nell held it up, a hand-span circle of dull surak iron, its inner face grown over with a rind of the beast's own flesh, and welded to its outer curve. She saw now, turning it in the lamplight, a small sealed node of dark ceramic with a filament of blue running through it that had no business being on a simple restraint ring at all. "What's this?" she said. She was not really asking the room. She was asking Rahel. "This on the ring, this little box, that's not for holding him. What is it?" Rahel looked at it, and the color went out of his gray hide from the crest down, which is a thing Surak do when they are very afraid. And he said, in a voice that had gone flat and fast, "Put it down. Put it down, don't crush it, don't drop it, that's a scuttle charge. Every instrument carries one in the primary ring, the one they drive first. It's how the beast caste is taught to think of them. An instrument that cannot be controlled is an instrument that must not be captured. If a beast can't be commanded and can't be recovered, the handler triggers the ring," and he stopped. He looked at the old beast lying spent and quiet under Nell's hands, the ring that had held its death for 2 years now cut free and harmless in her grip. "You just took his out. You took his out with your hands. He's the only one in this room who's safe." Nell went very still. "Rahel," she said quietly in the tone of a woman on a cold morning who has just heard a sound from the direction of the herd that she does not like. "The other one, the 10th, the one lying down over there being good, has it still got its ring?" Up on the high dais, unhurried, the speaker warden of the Surak ascendancy folded his long hands together and looked down into the well at the human holding the drawn scuttle charge, and at the 12 traitor handlers, and at the 2 beasts that had shamed him before the whole assembled sky, and Octal Vresh, who had come to the conquered to teach a room to be afraid, allowed himself, at last, a small and genuine smile. "Speaker Warden." His legal aide was at his shoulder again, low and urgent. Oru, watching from the well now, could read the shape of the words even at a distance, because they were the same words the aide had used before, and this time they were frightened. "You cannot. Not in open chamber. The whole conquered is witness. If you trigger the 10th ring here in this room before all of them." "If I trigger the 10th ring here," Vresh said, not bothering to lower his voice, so that the whole well heard him, so that he meant the whole well to hear him, "then the conquered's little miracle dies in the middle of its own miracle, and every delegate in this chamber learns the true lesson of the afternoon, which is not that a beast can be gentled, but that the ascendancy's reach extends into the very spine of anything you think you have taken from us." They will remember the second lesson far longer than the first. He unfolded his hands. On the inside of his left wrist, worked into the black metal of a bracer Oru had taken for ornament, a small panel of the same dark ceramic woke and began slowly to glow. You have all had your barn afternoon. Recorder, note the time. Note that the human was warned. Nell, said Envoy held, and there was no diplomacy left in it at all, only the flat bark of an old soldier. Get away from the 10th. Get away from it now. But Nell Caro was already moving toward it. The 10th watched her come. It lay in the center of the well with its head on its forelegs, and it watched the small human cross the open stone toward it, and nothing in its bred and polished body knew what to do with the sight, because nothing had ever crossed open stone toward it that was not carrying a rod. It had been raised in the deeper hold, the good hold, the one where the handling was done not with pain but with the black flower. The slow chemical hollowing the ascendancy had perfected after Nine's line proved too apt to break. The 10th did not feel the itch. The 10th did not feel the ring in its spine. The 10th had been made, at great expense, to feel almost nothing at all, so that there would be nothing in it for a kind hand to reach, and by that logic it should have been unreachable, and the Surak who designed it had been very proud of the logic. But it had smelled the old beast carry, and under the black flower, in the deep place the chemical had not quite drowned. Something very old had turned over in its sleep and half-woken, and it did not have a name for the small warm thing coming toward it, but it knew, the way you know a word in a language you spoke as a child and have not spoken since, that the thing coming toward it was the kind of thing a grail carries, and that it had been a very long time since it had carried anything, and that it was so tired. "Hey," said Nell low, dropping to a crouch 3 paces off, palm open from below. "Hey, I know they made you not to feel it. I know you're not sore like he was. I'm not coming to fix a sore. I'm coming to take a thing out of your back that's going to kill you if I don't, and I need you to let me, and I've got no way to tell you that except to come slow and keep my hand where you can see it. That's all I've got, same as him, just my hand." On the dais, the panel on Vresh's wrist climbed from blue toward white. "It arms slow," Rahel said, at Nell's shoulder. He had crossed the well with her, he was not going to not cross it, and his voice was tight and fast. "The scuttle charge. There's a clearance delay built in, so a handler who has to trigger it point blank has time to get out of the blast. 10 count, maybe 12, from full arm. He's not there yet. When his wrist goes white he's committed, and then it's 10. 10 to get the ring clear of the beast or get the beast clear of the room, and you can't move a grail 10 paces in 10 count, so it has to be the ring." He looked at the ancestral edge still in her bloody hand. "You have to cut it out the way you cut out the old one. In 10 count. From a beast that has never once in its life been touched." "Then I'd better start now," said Nell, "and you'd better keep talking to me about how slow it arms, because I'm going to need something steady to listen to." And she went the last 3 paces on her knees, slow, palm open, and laid her hand flat on the black beast's foreleg. The 10th did not flinch. That was worse, somehow, than Nine's flinching. It only turned its head and looked at her hand on its leg with a kind of remote wonder, as though the sensation were reaching it from very far away. Down at the bottom of the well the black flower had made of it, and Nell felt the difference under her palm at once. Where the old beast had been all raw nerve, this one was banked, damped, a fire under ash, and she understood that she was not going to be able to reach this one the way she had reached the last one, that there was no bright itch to answer, and that she was going to have to do the whole hard thing on trust the animal did not know how to give, in 10 count, with a blade. "All right," she breathed. "All right, you can't feel me, can you? They took that off you. God, what they did to you, all right, you don't have to feel me. You just have to hold still. Rahel wears its ring. Base of the crest, same as his, 3rd plate there, the fresh weld." "White," said Envoy held from close behind them now, flat and clear, a soldier calling a range. "His wrist's gone white. That's your 10, Nell. 9, 8. Nell laid the edge of a 900-year-old hunting knife against the root of the ring in the spine of a beast that could not feel it and could kill her without meaning to if it moved wrong, and she put her other hand flat on the black plates beside it. not scratching. There was nothing to scratch, only staying, only the weight and warmth of a hand that meant to be there, and she said, "Stay with me, big one. I know you can't feel it, but stay with me anyway." And she cut. 7. 6. The ring was newer than Nine's and had not fused, and that was the one mercy of the black flower. A beast that does not worry its wound leaves the wound clean. And the blade went in true, and Nell worked it fast and sure around the buried curve of the iron. And the 10th felt something, far down, a pressure, a wrongness, the ghost of a pain the chemical would not let all the way up, and it made a sound it had never made in its life. A low, uncertain, questioning sound, and it began to lift its head. 5. Nell, it's coming up. Rachel, its head, get its head, put your hands on it and tell it what you told the other one. And Rachel of the beast caste, who had spent his life driving iron into these creatures, threw himself down across the black beast's jaw and pressed both scarred hands flat to its skull and put his brow against its brow, close, the way no handler had ever dared. And he spoke to it in the fast guttural cant of the ones who did the dirty work, and what he said, Oru learned long afterward when she asked him, was not a command and not a comfort, but only, over and over, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, we didn't know what you were. I'm sorry." 4-3. The ring came free. Nell tore it out of the black beast's spine with the last of her strength, and the scuttle charge came with it. The little dark node with its filament gone from blue to white and climbing, live in her hand, and there was no time to throw it clear, and there were people all around her, and there was. She saw in one flat frozen instant, only one place in the whole well of the conquered where a live charge could be sent to do no harm, straight up, into the empty vault of the ancient dome. Into the 100 feet of nothing between the delegates and the old stone sky. She came up out of her crouch and threw it the way she had thrown 1,000 hay lines up onto 1,000 wagons on 1,000 mornings, from the hip, with her whole back, and the little white node sailed up into the dark of the vault and hung at the top of its arc. And Recorder Oru, who was looking straight at it, saw it go from white to a color that has no name, and then the top of the ombric rotunda filled with a flat, hard flower of light and a sound like the sky being slapped. And dust and old stone came sifting, and then raining down, and the whole conquered threw its arms over its heads and screamed. And when the dust cleared and the light stopped, and the delegates lowered their arms and looked, the two beasts were still there, unharmed, curled now around each other, and around the small human and the gray Surak handler in the center of the well, in a great protective knot of scarred hide and black plate. And the human was on her feet in the middle of it, filthy, bleeding from a dozen small cuts where the falling stone had caught her, holding a 900-year-old knife in one hand and an empty iron ring in the other. And up on the high dais, the panel on the speaker warden's wrist had gone dark and dead, its charge spent on nothing, its lesson undelivered, and Octal Vresh was staring down into the well at the human who had thrown his masterpiece into the roof of the sky. And for the first time in the memory of anyone in that chamber, the speaker warden of the Surak ascendancy was not smiling. "You," Nell called up to him, and her voice cracked, and she did not care, and it carried anyway into every corner of the appalled and ringing dome. "You built a bomb into an animal's spine. You built it in when they were babies. You've been walking around this whole time with the trigger on your wrist like it was jewelry." She was shaking now, all of it coming up at once, the fear she had been too busy to feel all afternoon arriving in a flood. "There's more of them, aren't there? On your ship. You said there was a hold. How many of them have you got up there right now with a bomb in their back and a bracelet somewhere that sets it off?" The speaker warden of the Surak ascendancy looked down at her for a long moment. And then, because he had one card left, and because he was the kind of creature who would always play it, he lifted his other wrist, the right one, where a second panel, larger than the first, began to wake and glow. And he said, in a voice that had found its pleasantness again, the terrible pleasantness of a cornered thing that has decided to burn the house down rather than be put out of it. 22. Legate Asa of the Surak legal caste had served the speaker warden for 11 years, and in 11 years she had learned to read the exact moment the argument left him, and only the will remained, and she was reading it now, and it frightened her more than the beasts had. 22, Vresh said again, and let the number sit in the ringing dome. Aboard the flagship in the deep hold, ringed and ready. The second panel is a broadcast trigger. It reaches every ring at once. He turned his flat gaze slowly across the tiers, letting the whole Concord follow the logic to its end, because the terror was in the logic and he wanted them to walk it themselves. Here is the vote, then, and it is a simpler vote than the one you came to cast. The Concord will strike the fringe charter and place the outer fleets under my command, now, by voice, before this sitting rises, or I will close my hand, and 22 instruments will die in their hold, and the Concord will have the distinction of being the body that watched it happen and did nothing but debate the forms. The second panel climbed under his palm, blue toward white. Your barn afternoon has a price. I am naming it, vote. Speaker Warden. Asa heard her own voice come out of her and was distantly astonished by it. The instruments are ascendancy assets, 22 of them. Their breeding cost is entered in the fleet ledger at a figure I could recite to you. To destroy them out of, she chose the word, and having chosen it could not unchoose it out of temper in open session before the whole Concord is not a threat. It is the deliberate destruction of state property by a state officer, and under the ascendancy's own emergency provision, a speaker warden who moves to destroy the fleet's assets against the fleet's interest may be relieved on the floor by the concurrence of his own delegation. I am reading you the law, Speaker Warden. I have read you the law 3 times today. This is the 4th. The dais went very still. The ascendancy delegation, 40 strong, looked at their speaker warden with his hand on a trigger that would kill 22 of the fleet's most expensive living weapons, and they looked at the legate who had just spoken the emergency provision aloud, and Asa watched them do the arithmetic every one of them had spent the afternoon refusing to do, and she saw it land. These were not soft creatures. The Surak bred no soft creatures. But they were creatures who understood cost and value, and the difference between a weapon used and a weapon wasted, and their speaker warden had just announced, in front of the entire sky, that he would rather waste 22 irreplaceable assets than be embarrassed by a human with a knife. You will be silent, Vresh told his legate, or you will share their hold. I have been silent for 11 years, said Asa, and found to her own surprise that she was done being silent, and that being done with it felt the way she imagined the old beast's back had felt under the human's hand, like a thing carried a long time and finally set down. I am invoking the provision. Guard Captain. The speaker warden is relieved. Take his hands off the panels. On the dais, Vresh's personal guard, 6 beast-cast veterans in the gray hide harness, the biggest and hardest of a hard people, did not move. And that, Asa thought, in the long sick pause that followed, was where it would end, because the law was only words and the guard was 6 warriors who had followed this speaker up out of the beast cast into the light. And words do not take a trigger off a wrist, warriors do, and the warriors were not moving, and the panel under Vresh's palm had reached white. 30 count, said Vresh pleasantly, to clear the hold crew, and then it fires. My people are loyal, legate, unlike yours, 29, 28. Down in the well, the 10th stood up. It rose out of the protective knot in the center of the well, its ring gone, its spine free for the first time in its manufactured life, and it turned its black head up toward the high dais and the counting speaker, and it took one step, and the whole Concord felt the floor take its weight. And the guard captain of the speaker warden's personal guard, a beast-cast veteran named Doran who had driven more rings into more grail than any handler alive, looked down from the dais at the freed instrument coming toward his speaker, and then looked, because he could not help it, at the 2 humans and the traitor Rehel still crouched in the center of the well among the beasts, and at the empty ring in the human's hand, cut out clean, harmless, and something moved in the old veteran's face. Captain, Vresh said, not turning, counting. 24, kill the beast, it's coming. The guard captain looked at the Grail climbing toward the dais, unhurried, unstoppable, free. "No, Speaker Warden," said Doran, in the fast guttural can of the beast caste, the tongue the legal caste did not speak and the speaker had long forgotten. "I drove rings for 30 years. I told myself it was work." He reached out slowly and closed his enormous scarred hand around the Speaker Warden's right wrist, around the white-lit panel, around the hand that held the deaths of 22 Grail. "I am tired of the work." And he broke the contact. Asa never fully understood the mechanism, though Rahel explained it to her later, that the mass trigger, like the single charge, was a dead man's design, that it fired only if the hand holding it completed the clearance count with the contact unbroken, that it had been built that way for the handler's own protection, so that a handler struck down mid-trigger would not take the whole hold with him. Vresh had built his last threat on a safety meant to protect the caste he despised, and the caste he despised had used it to stop him. The panel on his wrist, its count interrupted, its contact broken, dumped its charge harmlessly into the dais floor with a small anticlimactic hiss and went dark. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then Octal Vresh, Speaker Warden of the Surak Ascendancy, who had come to the Concord of the 9 Thresholds to teach a room to be afraid, made the last mistake of his career, which was to reach for the sidearm at his belt and turn it, not on the beast, not on the guard, but down into the well, at the small, filthy, bleeding human who had unmade his whole afternoon with an open hand. He never cleared the holster. The 10th came up the dais in a single black surge that recorder Oru's formal record renders, with great restraint, as the second instrument reached the speaker's station. And what the dry line does not carry is the sight of the perfect bred killing weapon of the Surak Ascendancy, freshly freed of the ring that had made it a slave, placing its whole vast bulk between the Speaker Warden and the well below, not tearing, not rending, only interposing. The carrying instinct turned outward into a wall of black plate, and then lowering its great head until its jaws were level with the speaker's throat, and stopping there, and holding, a hand's breadth off, breathing its long, wet breath into the face of the creature that had ordered it made. The whole Concord held its breath with the beast. It could have closed its jaws. Every soul in the chamber knew it could have closed its jaws, and knew, too, that no law in the 9 systems would have called it wrong, and some of them, Oru saw it in the tears, the old hunting bloodlines leaning forward, the ancient want rising in them. Some of them wished it would. The Speaker Warden had earned it. The whole long weight of the afternoon leaned toward the closing of those jaws. "Hey!" The voice came up out of the well, small and cracked and steady, and the black beast's ear turned to it, though its eyes never left the speaker's throat. "Hey, big one!" No, Nell Caro had climbed up onto the first step of the dais, one hand pressed to a cut on her brow, and she was looking not at Vresh but at the beast, at the 10th, at the thing she had cut a bomb out of 10 minutes before. "That's not what you are. I know what he made you for. I know what you could do to him, and I know he's got it coming. But that's his kind of thing, that closing your jaws to win an argument. That's his whole entire kind of thing, and you're not his anymore, so you don't do his kind of thing." She held out her open hand from below, the way she had come at all of them, palm up, unafraid. "You're the one who carries. Come off him. Come here. Come to my hand. Let the rest of them deal with him the slow, boring, lawful way, the way that doesn't make you into the thing he wanted. Come on. Come here to me." The 10th held over the speaker's throat for one more long moment. Then it lifted its head and left him living and turned and came down off the dais to the human's open hand and put its blunt black skull into her palm and let her scratch at last the base of its crest where the ring had been, where for the first time in its life there was nothing but skin, and it made, uncertain and cracked and learning the shape of it, the low bell note. And the Speaker Warden of the Surak Ascendancy stood alone and unharmed and utterly undone on his high dais, spared by the beast he had built, in front of the entire assembled sky, which was the one thing in all the systems he could not survive. They took the Speaker Warden into custody under his own emergency provision, and it was his own guard who did it. And Recorder Oru noted for the record that Octal Vresh went without a word, which surprised the tears, and did not surprise her at all. A creature whose entire power is the fear it commands has nothing left to say to a room that has stopped being afraid. He had spent his voice. He walked out of the Ombric Rotunda between two beast-caste veterans he had once ruled, and the whole Concord watched him go, and the watching was worse for him than any sentence, and everyone in the chamber understood that, and let it be his sentence for the moment while the true one was drawn up. But the Concord's danger had not left with him. The flagship, Legate Asa, had come down from the dais into the well, and she stood now over the humans and the beasts with the stiff carriage of a creature holding herself together by protocol alone. 22 instruments remain in its deep hold, ringed. The speaker warden's broadcast panel is destroyed, but he is not the only officer aboard with a trigger, and there is a standing order. There has always been a standing order, that an instrument which cannot be recovered to ascendancy control must be scuttled rather than fall to another power. The Hold Master reads his orders literally. He always has. It is why he holds the post. With the speaker relieved and 2 instruments, she looked at 9 and the 10th, in the hands of the Concord. A literal reading of the standing order says the remaining 22 are lost assets, and lost assets are scuttled. Then he'll do it, said Rel. He was on his feet already. Vosk, the Hold Master's Vosk, I know him. He'll do it by the book because the book is the only thing that ever loved him back. He won't even think it's cruel, he'll think it's tidy. He was moving toward the great doors before he finished speaking. Somebody get me a shuttle to that flagship, right now. He'll want the station cycle to turn over first. He does everything on the cycle. It's the book, so there's time, an hour, maybe 2, but not more. And it has to be a beast-cast voice that reaches him. It can't be law and it can't be humans. It has to be one of us telling him the order's dead. It has to be rank, said Guard Captain Doran, falling in beside him, and the old veteran's presence settled something in the younger handler's frantic motion. Vosk won't hear a relieved handler. He'll hear a guard captain who stands the provision. I'll say the words, you'll say the rest. He looked back once at the human still crouched among the beasts. Provisioner, the old one. Will it live? Nell had her hands buried in Nine's hide again, feeling the old beast's breath, which had gone shallow and fast, and the great slow heart under it, which was laboring. I don't know, she said, and did not dress it up because you do not dress it up. He gave everything he had keeping that black beast off me, and he was half dead before he started. He needs to be still and warm and left alone with somebody he trusts for days, and that's the opposite of everything that's happened to him his whole life, so I don't know. But he's not quitting yet. Look at him. He's not the quitting kind. None of them are. That's the whole tragedy of what you people did to them. You took the least quitting creatures in the sky, and you spent them like coin. Doran looked at the old beast for a long moment. Then the guard captain of the Surak Ascendancy did a thing that went around the fleet for a generation afterward. He lowered himself, all his hard bulk, onto one knee in the well of the Concord, and he put his scarred old hand flat on the flank of the beast he had spent his life wringing, and he said, in the guttural cant, quietly, "Live, then, carrier. I have a great deal to make right, and I would rather begin it with you alive." And then he rose and went to save the 22. What happened aboard the flagship, Oru assembled later from the accounts of those who were there, and set down in the true record, the one she kept for herself. They came into the deep hold, Doran, Rahel, Asa with the provision writ, and 6 of the Concord's neutral station guard who came because Envoy Held asked them to, and because the whole station had by now heard some version of the afternoon, and no one wanted to be the guard who stood aside. And they found the Hold Master Vosk exactly where the book said he would be, at the master station, entering the scuttle sequence with the unhurried care of a creature performing a rite. And the 22 grail in their pens along the great dark length of the hold, ringed and chained and breathing their long wet breaths, 22 of them, some old and scarred like 9, some young and black and hollowed like the 10th. All of them lifting their heads as the doors opened, because all of them had learned that opening doors meant the rod. "Hold, Master Vosk." Doran's voice filled the hold. "Stand off the sequence. The standing order is void. The speaker warden is relieved under provision, and the instruments are not lost. They are recovered to the conquered alive, and the fleet ledger will show them as recovered assets, not scuttled ones, which is the difference between a loss you answer for and a saving you are thanked for. Stand off." Vosk did not turn from the master station. "The order is not yours to void, guard captain," he said, in the flat voice of a creature who had built his whole small life on the book, because the book had never once been cruel to him the way people had. An instrument in another power's hands is a lost instrument. The provisioner in the conquered has two of them eating from her palm. That is the definition. I am tidying the loss. It is what I am for. His hand moved over the sequence. "Do not make me report that a guard captain interfered with a lawful scuttle. It would go badly for you in the ledger." And Rehel of the Beast Caste, who was a coward, who had been a coward all his life and had stopped being one only that afternoon and did not yet trust the new thing in him, stepped past the guard captain and past the law and walked down the long dark aisle of the hold between the pens of the 22, past all those lifting heads, all those flinching bodies, all that patient, terrible patience, and he stopped at the master station beside the hold master he had known for years. And he did not argue the book with him, because you cannot outbook a creature who is made of the book. He told him about the itch. "There's a place on them they can't reach," Rehel said quietly, so that only Vosk could hear it, though the hold was listening. All 22 of them were listening the way beasts listen to a voice with no rod behind it. "Under the third plate, where we drive the first ring, it itches, Vosk, their whole lives. And they can't get at it, not with their jaws, not against a wall, not ever, because of how they're shaped. And we drive the ring right into the one place they can't guard, and we call the flinching aggression, and the aggression is why we say they need the ring. It's a circle. We made the monster, and then we pointed at the monster to explain why we needed to make it. I drove rings for 2 years telling myself they were dangerous, and this afternoon a human scratched that place on the old one with her bare hand, and the monster laid down and cried like a whelp in front of the whole conquered, and it was never a monster, Vosk. It was an itch we wouldn't scratch. That's all it ever was. That's the whole secret of the instruments. You're not tidying a loss. You're about to kill 22 animals to hide the fact that the only thing wrong with them was us." The hold master Vosk stood with his hand over the scuttle sequence for a very long time. Then slowly, in the dark of the deep hold, with 22 ringed grail watching and a guard captain and a legate and 6 station guard holding their breath, the hold master reached up under the third plate of the nearest pen's beast, an old scarred female not unlike 9, reached in past every rule he had ever kept, to the place the book had never once mentioned because the book had been written by people who did not want it mentioned, and he scratched. The grail made the bell note. All 22 of them, up and down the great dark hold, one after another, as the sound and the smell of a kind hand reached them, the low resonant relief note rolling from pen to pen until the whole flagship's deep hold rang with it. A sound no Surek had ever heard because no Surek had ever done the one thing that made it, and Vosk the hold master, tidiest of a hard people, stood there with his hand in an animal's spine, and the scuttle sequence forgotten on the panel behind him. And he did not weep, because his kind did not weep, but Rehel told Oru afterward that the old bookkeeper's whole body shook once and then went still, and then Vosk said, in a voice gone strange and quiet, "How long? How long have they?" and could not finish it, and did not need to, because the answer was the whole history of his people's mercy, which was to say all of it, the entire time. The conquered did not adjourn that night. It could not. There was no precedent for adjourning in the middle of the thing that was happening, and the conquered ran on precedent the way a body runs on blood, so it simply stayed in session, hour after hour, while the flagship's hold was opened and the 22 were brought down. They came down through the station's great cargo locks and along the wide processional way that led to the Ombrick Rotunda, 22 Grail walking free for the first time in their lives, and they did not run, and they did not scatter, and they did not tear the station apart, though the station had braced itself in its deepest engineering for exactly that. They walked. They walked in a loose, slow river of scarred hide and black plate, flanked not by handlers with rods but by the beast cast on foot with their hands empty, and by station folk of a dozen species who had come out to line the processional way and had gone silent as the beasts passed. And at the head of the river, because the Grail would follow no one else, walked a small filthy human in a torn provisioner's coat with a 900-year-old knife through her belt and both hands empty at her sides. Nell had not asked to lead them. She had gone up to the cargo locks only to be there when Nine's litter mates came down, because she thought the old beast, if it lived, would want to smell its own kind again, and she had brought Nine up on a low-powered sled that the station's freight crew had rigged, because the old beast could not walk, and she had meant only to stand beside the sled and let the 22 come to it. But the 22 had come down out of the locks, and they had smelled the human who smelled of working beasts and carried no rod, and they had smelled the two freed Grail at her side, and they had done the thing their kind did, the thing the Surak had bred the killing into and never quite bred out. They had found the one who carried, and they had fallen in behind her. Recorder Oru watched them come into the rotunda from the recorder's box, which she had returned to because the record still had to be kept, and she set down what she saw, and what she saw was this. The human came in first, walking slow beside the sled where the old scarred beast lay breathing its labored breath, and behind her came the black 10th, close at her shoulder like a shadow given weight. And behind the 10th came the 22, filling the whole central well of the Concord and the processional way behind it, folding down as they came into the great slow resting knots the Grail made, plates against plates, until the most powerful room in 9 star systems held in its center a living hill of apex predators arranged in perfect unforced order around one small tired human who had no idea she commanded them and would have laughed if you told her she did. "Let the recorder note," said the chair in a voice not entirely steady, that the recovered instruments are present in the chamber, and that they appear to be. The chair looked at the vast peaceful hill of beasts and reached for a word the forms did not supply, settled. "They're just tired," Nell said from the well, not looking up from 9. "They've been up a long time. Everybody's been up a long time. Can we get this vote done so these animals can sleep? Please. They've earned a night's sleep more than anybody in this room, and that includes me." The vote got done. It did not go the way the afternoon had threatened. It went the other way, all the way the other way, the way a room goes when it has been shown its own fear and cannot unsee it. The fringe charter was not struck. It was affirmed and broadened the outer colony's right to their own defense, written, now not as a grudging exception, but as a principle, because a chamber that has just watched what the concentration of frightening power does to the creature that wields it is a chamber briefly, genuinely wise. The Surak Ascendancy's seat was suspended pending a full accounting of the instrument program, and Legate Asa, who now spoke for what remained of the delegation, did not contest the suspension. She asked only that the accounting be complete and public, and that the beast cast, the ones who did the work and who ended it, be heard as witnesses and not tried as accomplices, and the Concord granted it, and Guard Captain Doran bowed his hard old head, and Rehel, standing at the back of the beast cast, wept the flat, tearless Surak weeping and did not try to hide it. And Octal Vresh, speaker warden that had been, was censured by name, the gravest instrument the Concord possessed, a formal finding entered into the permanent record of the 9 thresholds that a named individual had brought a weapon into the chamber of law and called it an argument. It carried no cell and no chain. It did not need to. It meant that for the rest of his life, in every system that kept the Concord's record, Octal Vresh would be the creature who was disarmed by a galley servant with an open hand, the speaker warden whose masterpiece laid its head in a human's palm rather than close its jaws on his throat, and that no telling of it would ever be kind to him, because the true telling did not need to be. Oru wrote the censure in the formal script, and then, because she was old and had earned the liberty, she wrote beneath it, in the true record, the smaller and more permanent finding: he was not defeated, he was disbelieved. There is no coming back from a room that has stopped believing you. By then the thing that would be called the unafraid hand had already begun to spread, and it spread fastest, as such things do, among exactly the peoples you would least expect. The Ashari came first. 3 of their delegation descended into the well, great cats in the formal grays of their war college, and asked gravely, with enormous ceremony, whether the human would consent to demonstrate the principle. Nell, who did not know she had authored a principle, said she didn't know what they meant, and the eldest Ashari explained with the patience of the very serious that they wished to understand the doctrine of the 2 hands, the cutting hand and the staying hand, and how a warrior might hold both at once. Nell looked at them for a moment. "It's not a doctrine," she said. "It's just look. You've got animals, right, on your world, working animals or animals you keep." The Ashari conceded that they did. "And when one of them's hurt and you have to do a thing that hurts it worse to make it better, clean a wound, set a bone, you don't just do the hurting part and walk off. You keep a hand on it, you talk to it. You let it know the hurt's got a person on the other side of it who's staying. That's all. Anybody who's ever cared for a beast knows it. It's not war college, it's just not being cruel while you're doing a hard thing." She scratched Nine's neck absently as she spoke. "You want to carve that over a door, I can't stop you, but you already knew it. Everybody who ever loved an animal already knows it. You just forgot you knew." The Ashari wrote all of this down with tremendous seriousness, and carved a slightly grander version of it over the door of their war college within the year, and Nell Caro never did understand why they made it complicated. But the old warrior peoples of the conquered needed it made complicated, Oru understood. They needed it dressed in doctrine and carved in stone, because they had spent so long being the frightening thing that they could not simply be told to stop. They had to be given a discipline of stopping, a martial art of the staying hand, something a hard people could practice with the same rigor they had once practiced the hunt. The human had handed them, without meaning to, a way to be gentle that did not require them to feel weak. It was the most valuable thing anyone had brought into the conquered in 100 years, and she had brought it in with the tea service. But all of that was for later, for the record, for the long, slow turning of the thing into history. That night in the Well of the Conquered, none of it mattered to Nell Caro, because the old scarred beast on the freight sled had stopped making the bell note, and its labored breath had gone quiet, and quiet was worse. "Rahel," Nell had both hands on the old beast's chest, over the great slow laboring heart, and her voice had gone flat and fast, the calving shed voice, the one that meant the night had turned bad. "Rahel, he's going. His heart's all over the place and his gums are going gray and he's cold at the ends. He's bled more than I thought, or he's bled inside where I can't see it. And I don't know your beasts. I know cattle and haul teams and drift toxin. I don't know what a grail's supposed to. I need somebody who knows what's under this hide. Right now." Rahel was there before she finished, and Doran with him. And then, unbidden, Hold Master Vosk, who of all of them had spent the most hours with the living bodies of the Grail, even if he had spent them cataloging rather than caring. The 3 beast-cast Surak bent over the old beast in the Well of the Conquered, and for the first time in the history of their caste, they used everything they knew about Grail anatomy not to control a beast, but to save one. And Oru watched them work, and understood that this, too, was a kind of doctrine being born. The whole grim expertise of the ring drivers turned inside out, the map of the beast's body redrawn from a map of where to hurt it into a map of how to keep it alive. "The wound over the false rib," Vosk said, hands moving. "It's still bleeding into the cavity. We can reach it, but he has to be still, and he has to let us. And a grail in this state doesn't let anyone near the wound, it guards it. It'll take a limb off anything that comes at the wound. It's the last thing the body does before. He'll let me, Nell said. Show me where, talk me through it. He'll let me, and if I've got my hands on the wound, he'll let you work around them because he'll know it's me holding it and not somebody hurting it. That's how the black one held still for the knife. Same trick. There's no other trick. Come on. Come on, we're losing him talking about it. And so they did the thing, the four of them, in the center of the most powerful room in 9-star systems, at the deep middle of the night, with the whole Concord still in session, because no one could bring themselves to leave. The human held the old beast's open side together with her bare hands and her steady voice, while 3 Surak of the beast caste worked to close what was bleeding inside, and the old beast 9, who should by every measure of its ruined body have been dead or murderous, lay still and let them, because the hands on the worst of its hurt were the hands that had scratched its back, and in the whole long arithmetic of its life, those hands were the only entry on the side of the ledger that was not pain, and it would sooner die still than pull away from them. Around them the 22 woke. They had been settling towards sleep, the great resting knots loosening, and now, as the old beast's distress moved through the hold smell of the chamber, they woke all at once and they rose, and the Concord's late-night quiet broke on a sound like a landslide as 22 Grail came up onto their feet in the well and along the processional way, and every delegate still in the chamber came up too, in a fresh cold wash of the afternoon's fear, because here at last, surely, was the moment the beasts turned. The moment the frightening thing everyone had known was coming finally came. It did not come. The 22 did not turn on the room. They turned inward, toward the sled, toward the dying one and the human bent over it, and they moved slowly, gravely, with the terrible coordination of a kind built to move as one around its vulnerable, until they had formed a wall. A living wall of scarred hide and black plate, a full circle of apex predators standing shoulder to shoulder with their backs to the old beast, and their heads out toward the chamber, facing the tiers, facing the delegates, facing every direction from which harm might come. And they lowered their crests, and they did not snarl, and they did not need to, because a ring of 22 Grail standing guard is an argument that does not require raising its voice. They had understood, in the way their kind understood, that one of their own was down, and that the human was trying to save it, and that their whole purpose in that moment was to stand around the saving and let nothing on any side interrupt it. Recorder Oru wrote, in the true record, they did not protect her from us. They protected her work from everything. There is a difference, and I did not understand it until tonight, and I am ashamed of every year I called such creatures monsters. Inside the wall, Nell worked, and did not know the wall was there, because she had eyes only for the old beast's face. And the old beast 9, at the bottom of the deep failing dark of its body, felt the thing it had never felt in the whole of its life, felt its own kind close around it, plate against plate, the carrying warmth of the pack it had never had, the warmth the Surak had bred it in isolation precisely so that it would never know, and felt, over the worst of its hurt, the small warm hands that stayed. And somewhere in the old beast a decision got made, the way such decisions get made in bodies that have run out of everything else, and the great slow heart, which had been all over the place, found a rhythm and held it and did not stop. There Vosk breathed, hours later, sitting back on his heels with the beast's blood to his elbows. There, it's holding, the cavities closed. Its guard captain, it's holding. The tidy hold master looked at his own red hands as though he had never seen them. I have opened 40 Grail in my life. I never once closed one. I did not know it could be done. I did not know they were. I did not know. He's going to make it. Nell had not moved. Her hands were still pressed to the old beast's side, and she was gray with exhaustion, and there were tracks down through the grime on her face that she had not noticed making. He is going to make it, said Vosk, if he is kept still and warm and left with someone he trusts for days. which is what you told the guard captain at the beginning before any of us believed a word you said. He looked at her across the body of the beast. How did you know? At the very start. When it came through the doors and the whole Concord was afraid of it. How did you know it wasn't a monster? Nell was quiet for a moment, her thumb moving in a small circle on the old beast's hide, the way you soothe a thing that is finally sleeping. Because a monster doesn't reach back for the place that itches, she said. It just hurts you. Only an animal that wants to feel better reaches for the place it can't get. I saw him reach for his own back and come up short over and over, and I thought, that's not a killer. That's just somebody nobody's ever helped. And I was raised that when you see that, you go help. You don't hold a vote about it. She looked up then and found the whole vast chamber watching her, 22 Grail and 1,000 delegates and an old recorder in her box, and she seemed to remember all at once where she was, and a tired flush went up her neck. Sorry, I'm not a speech person. Can somebody find him a blanket, a big one? He's cold and he's going to be cold for days, and I'm not leaving him, so somebody's going to have to bring the blankets to me. And the delegate of the Viharal, Counselor Ondasa, ancient and dry and correct, who had drawn the ancestral edge of his grandsire's last hunt and given it to a human to lance a boil, Ondasa rose in his tier and unfastened the formal mantle from his own shoulders, the mantle of a counselor of the 9 thresholds, which had never in 900 years touched anything but a Viharal magistrate, and he came down into the well. Past the wall of Grail that parted to let him through because the human's eyes told them to, and he laid the mantle over the old scarred beast with his own 2 hands, and he said gravely, "It is the warmest thing I own. Do not tell the other counselors." And then, because even the Viharal have their limits, the old magistrate stayed and knelt, and put his own ancient hand on the sleeping beast beside the human's, and kept the vigil with her through what remained of the night. The accounting began the next morning, because the Concord had discovered, all in one night, that it wanted very badly to know exactly what had been done to the creatures sleeping in its well, and by whom, and for how long, and the wanting to know was itself a new thing, a thing the chamber had not wanted the day before, when it had preferred the beasts to be monsters, because monsters ask no questions of the people who fear them. They called the beast cast to testify. Not as accused, Asa had held the Concord to that, and the Concord, chastened, had held to it, but as witnesses, the only witnesses alive to the whole of it, and one by one the gray-harnessed handlers who had done the dirty work of a whole empire came and stood in the well where the human had knelt, and told the chamber what the instrument program was, in plain words, from the inside. It was Rehel who broke it open. He had not meant to speak long. He was a low creature of a low caste, and unused to floors and tears and the weight of 1,000 eyes, and he began haltingly, giving dates and stock numbers and the dry mechanics of the rings. And then Counselor Ondasa, gently from his tier, asked him the question the dry mechanics had been circling, which was simply, why the 3rd plate handler? Of all the places on the animal to drive the first ring, why there? And Rehel stood in the well of the Concord of the 9 thresholds, and looked at the old scarred beast sleeping under a Viharal magistrate's mantle, and answered the question he had spent 2 years not letting himself ask. Because it's where they can't reach, he said. That's the whole of it, counselor. A grail's built so it can't turn its head or its jaws or its feet to the base of its own crest. The plates lock it out. It's the one place on the entire animal that it cannot ever get to, and it itches. The hide there is thin and it gathers grit, and it itches them their whole lives and they can never once scratch it. And we, the caste, we learned early that a grail half-mad from an itch it can't reach is a grail that flinches and lunges and looks, to anyone watching, exactly like a monster. So we drove the ring in there, into the itch. Because a beast that's already frantic at that spot will react to a ring there worse than anywhere else, and the reaction is what we sold. We built the monster out of the one cruelty the animal could never defend against, and then we pointed at the monster we'd built and said, you see, You see why it must be ringed. You see why only we can hold it." His voice had gone flat and terrible. It was a circle. The ring made the rage, and the rage justified the ring. 2 years I drove them, and I told myself the beasts were dangerous. The human took one ring out with her hands, and the beast wept. There was never a monster. There was an itch, and a lie we told about the itch, and the lie was worth a fleet to us, so we kept telling it. That's the instrument program, counselors. That's all it ever was. A wound we made on purpose in the one place they couldn't guard, and called it their nature. The chamber was silent a long time after that. It was the silence, Oru wrote, of 1,000 delegates, each privately counting the times they, too, had preferred a convenient monster to an inconvenient truth, and finding the count higher than they liked. "There is a word my people used," Asa said into the quiet when it was her turn. She had brought the ledgers, the real ones, and she read from them without flinching, because she had decided that flinching was a thing she was done doing. In the breeding records, for the moment a young instrument stopped fighting the ring and accepted it, for the day it broke, she turned a page. We called it settling. We entered it in the ledger as a milestone, as progress. A well-settled instrument was worth more than an unsettled one, and the handlers who settled them quickly were commended. She looked up. "I have written the word settled in 100 reports. I never once let myself ask what it named. It named the day we finished teaching a creature that carries the vulnerable through the dark that no one was ever going to carry it. That is what my empire meant by progress. I would like the record to hold the word settled forever, exactly as we used it, so that no one can ever again pretend they did not know what it cost." And Recorder Oru, in the box, wrote the word settled into the permanent record of the 9 thresholds, with the legates' meaning fixed beside it, where it remains, and where the jurists of 4 worlds now cite it in the teaching of the unafraid hand, as the name of the thing the doctrine exists to refuse. By the 3rd day of the accounting, the chamber had heard enough of the program to be ashamed of the whole sky, and the shame, Oru noted, did a strange and useful thing. It made the delegates gentle with each other in a way she had not seen in 40 years. As though a room that has been shown one great cruelty it overlooked becomes briefly humble about all the smaller ones it might be overlooking still. Old feuds went quiet. The Delvish, who had folded first and most shamefully, brought a formal apology to the human tier, and the humans accepted it without gloating, because Envoy Held had taught her staff that the accepting of an apology without gloating is worth 10 victories won by the tongue. And somewhere in those 3 days, without anyone deciding it, the conquered stopped being a room the Surak had frightened and became a room that had frightened itself, looked hard at what it saw, and chosen, for once, to be better than its fear. The old beast lived. It was days before it stood, and longer before it walked, and in those days the conquered discovered that it had a problem no precedent could solve, which was that there were now 24 Grail on a diplomatic station built for delegates and clerks, and something had to be done with them, and every easy answer was a bad one. The bad answers came, as bad answers do, dressed well. A delegation of the inner powers, not the Surak. The Surak had no standing left to propose anything, but others quieter who had watched the whole affair with a calculating attention. Oru had marked at the time, put forward with great reasonableness, a motion that the recovered Grail be retained under conquered authority. For study, the motion said, for their own protection, for the security of all. The Grail, the motion observed, had demonstrated remarkable capabilities. It would be irresponsible, would it not, to simply release such creatures. Far better to keep them safe and managed and available under proper oversight in a suitable facility for the good of everyone. Recorder Oru listened to the motion and felt the old cold come back into the chamber, the patient, reasonable cold that was so much worse than Vresh's naked kind, and she thought, here it is. Here is the same hand reaching for the same collar, only this time it is wearing a glove and calling itself care. They watched a human unmake the weaponizing of these creatures, and their very first thought, their reflex, was how to weaponize them more gently. Envoy held rose to answer it, and did not get the chance, because Nell Caro answered it first from the well, where she had more or less lived for a week, sitting against the flank of the recovering beast. "No," she said. "The provisioner is not a delegate," someone observed, "and has no floor." "The provisioner has the floor," said Councillor Ondesav the Viharo, without rising, in a tone that ended the point. "No," Nell said again. "You're not keeping them. I know how it sounds when you say it nice like that, for their protection, for study in a suitable facility. That's a hold. You're describing a hold. You want to build them a nicer hold and put nicer people in charge of it and tell yourselves it's different because you'll be kind." She got to her feet, one hand on the old beast, and she was still just a tired young woman in a torn coat, and the whole Concord listened to her the way it had learned to. "It's not different. A cage you built out of good intentions is still a cage, and these animals have spent their whole lives in one, and the very first free choice any of them ever made was to lie down in the middle of your council and not hurt anybody. You want to reward that by studying them. They're not a capability. They're not an asset. They're not yours to keep safe. They're Grail. They carry. Let them carry. Let them go somewhere with room and cold mornings, and work worth doing, and people who understand that a big animal isn't a weapon just because it could be, and that's not here, and it's not any facility, and you all know exactly where it is, because you spent 3 days trying to take it away from us before you ever saw what came through that door." The silence after that was a long one. "She means the fringe," said Envoy Held quietly into it. "She means the outer colonies, the human holdings and the Delvish steadings and the frontier worlds full of people who have spent generations living alongside animals bigger and stronger than themselves, and working with them and never once needing a ring to do it. That is where creatures like these belong, not because we are worthy of them, because we are the ones who won't try to aim them." She let that sit. "The charter you affirmed 3 nights ago gives the outer colonies the right to manage their own affairs. I am asking the conquered to recognize that the Grail are now one of those affairs, and to let us take them home." The motion to retain the Grail was withdrawn before it came to a vote, which was its own kind of verdict, and the Grail were entered into the record of the 9 thresholds not as recovered assets, and not as capabilities, but under a category recorder Oru invented for them on the spot and defended for the rest of her career. Free persons of the frontier, formerly held. It was not good law. It made the jurists wince for a generation. It was, Oru maintained to her dying day, the truest thing she ever wrote into the record, and she had written the record for 60 years. And the beast caste went with them. That was Doran's doing, and Rehel's, and in the end even Vosk's. There was the matter of what to do with a caste of Surak who had spent their lives driving rings into Grail, now that the Grail were freed, and the ascendancy that had commanded them was suspended and disgraced. The conquered's instinct was to try them, and the frontier's instinct, which won, was to put them to work. Who else, Nell pointed out, actually knew Grail anatomy? Who else could read a Grail's body, catch a sickness early, close a wound, tell a limp from a laziness? The men who had made themselves experts in herding these animals were the only experts alive in keeping them well if they could be turned, and they had already turned, all 3 of them, in the deep hold and the long vigil. And a person who has done a terrible thing and stopped is often worth more at the mending of it than a person who never did the thing at all, because the one who stopped knows exactly in his hands what the mending is for. So the beast caste of the Surak ascendancy became the first keepers of the free Grail of the fringe, and Guard Captain Doran, who had driven more rings than any handler alive, spent the last decades of his life on a cold human colony world learning, one Grail at a time, the whole map of their bodies over again as a map of comfort. And Hold Master Vosk, tidiest of a hard people, kept the finest records of Grail health in the 9 systems, and never once wrote the word instrument in any of them. And Rehel, young Rehel, 2 years a coward and 1 afternoon a rebel, Rehel stayed closest of all to the old beast 9, because he had driven its first ring as a whelp, and could not rest until the old beast of all of them had reason to be glad he was alive. As for Octal Vresh, the record is brief, because his life became brief in the way that matters. He was returned to the ascendancy under its suspension, and the ascendancy, stripped of its conquered seat and facing a full public accounting of the instrument program, needed someone to be the reason for all of it. And there he was, censured by name, the speaker warden whose masterpiece had laid its head in a human's palm. He was quietly relieved of every office. He lived a long time, Oru heard, which she thought was the hardest thing that could have happened to him, to live a long time as the answer to a question children asked, the villain in the story of the unafraid hand, the one whose whole power had been fear and who had been unmade in front of the entire sky by a girl who was not afraid. He had wanted to be remembered. He got his wish. That was the punishment. There was never any need to invent a worse one. Nell Caro was offered a great many things in the weeks that followed. She was offered a seat, a title, a formal role in the accounting. She was offered honors by 4 delegations and a decoration by a 5th. The Ashari offered to enroll her, with full ceremony, as a master of the war college she had accidentally founded. She turned all of it down, with an increasingly harried politeness, and when the honors would not stop coming, she went to envoy held and asked, plainly, when they could go home, because the old beast was well enough to travel now and there were 24 Grail that needed to get somewhere with room before the whole lot of them went stir-crazy on a station. And because she did not say this part to the envoy, but the envoy understood it, because she was a provisioner, a galley hand. And the honors did not fit her any better than they would have fit 9, and she wanted her own cold mornings back, and her own plain work, and the animals. You know, envoy held said, on the last night before the frontier convoy sailed, watching her young provisioner check the old beast's healing side by lamplight in the station's cavernous freight bay, while 23 other Grail dozed in the warm dark around them. You changed the shape of 9 star systems this month. There will be children born this year on worlds you'll never see who grow up learning the unafraid hand. The charter holds because of you. The ascendancy fell because of you. And you're standing there worried about whether a beast's rib is knitting straight. Well, somebody's got to be, said Nell, not looking up, feeling along the old beast's side, and the old beast 9 turned its great scarred head and pressed its blunt skull into her, and made the bell note low and easy and whole. Or it won't knit straight, and then where's your 9 star systems? The world Nell Caro came from was called Harrowfast, which tells you most of what you need to know about it. It was the cold end of a cold colony, a holding world of long winters and short hard summers, where the frontier folk ran drift toxin on the high steadings and grew what would grow in the thaw, and spent the rest of the year keeping large animals alive through weather that wanted them dead. It was the last place in 9 star systems anyone would have thought to send a menagerie of alien apex predators, and it was, Nell had known from the first, exactly the right one, because Harrowfast was full of people who understood in their bones the one thing the whole conquered had needed a bomb in a beast's spine to learn, that a big animal is a responsibility, not a weapon, and that you earn its trust with your hands over long cold years and never, ever with a rod. They came down onto the high steading in the last of the autumn, 24 Grail and 3 Surak of the beast caste and 1 provisioner come home, and the holding folk turned out along the fence lines to watch them come, and there was fear in it at first, of course there was, because the Grail were the size of grain haulers and had teeth the color of old bone. But the fear did not last the week. It could not, because the Grail were, once free and once warm and once done being afraid themselves, the gentlest large creatures anyone on Harrowfast had ever worked with a patient past the patience of any ox, careful of the small and the slow, and possessed of the deep abiding steadiness of a kind whose whole ancestral purpose was to carry the vulnerable safely through the dark. By midwinter they were working the steadings. Not driven, no one on Harrowfast would have known how to drive them, and no one tried, but working, the way a good dog works, alongside of its own will, because the work was worth doing and the people were worth doing it for. A grail could break a path through drift snow that would have swallowed an ox. A grail could carry a fallen herder down off the high pasture in a storm, curled around them for warmth the whole way. And 3 of them did exactly that in the first winter, and all 3 herders lived who would not otherwise have seen the thaw. The holding folk stopped calling them the Grail, which was a conquered word, and started calling them the carriers, which was a translation of what the word had meant all along, and the name stuck. And within a few years no child on Harrowfast could remember a time before the carriers, or believe the traveler's tale that they had once been bred as living bombs to frighten a council of aliens on a station none of them would ever see. The beast cast took to Harrowfast slower than the beasts did. It was one thing to stop being a ring driver, and another to learn what a person did with his hands once the ring was gone. And Doran and Vosk and Rahel spent that first hard winter relearning their whole trade in reverse, under the flat frontier scrutiny of holding folk, who did not care what a Surak had been, and cared very much whether he could be trusted at the calving. They earned it the only way it is earned, which is slowly in the cold, at the difficult end of the night. Vosk built his health records into something the whole colony came to rely on, and taught 2 Harrowfast youngsters to keep them after him. Doran, who had commanded a speaker warden's guard, learned to muck a byre and did it without complaint, and the holding folk marked the not complaining, because on the frontier a proud creature who does the low work anyway is the only kind of proud creature worth keeping. And the children, who forgive faster than anyone and see truer, decided the gray tall aliens were part of the steading by the second thaw, and rode the carriers to the high pasture with a redeemed ring driver walking at the beast's head, and none of them ever knew, and Rahel never told them, that the hands leading their mount had once done the cruelest work in 9-star systems. He had stopped. He was the one who stopped. He had learned from a provisioner to be that one and not the other. 9 never worked. 9 had earned the right not to. The old beast healed slow and healed crooked, its torn crest grown back wrong, its ruined spine always stiff on the cold mornings, and it spent its days at Nell's heel and its nights across the foot of her bunk, too big for the room by half, one great scarred flank rising and falling against the wall, and it followed her from the byre to the pump to the high pasture, and back with the devotion of a creature making up for a whole life it had spent alone. It let the holding's children climb on it. It let them scratch the base of its crest, once they were shown how, and it made the bell note for them. And Harrowfast's children grew up thinking the low, resonant relief note of a content grail was simply a sound the world made, the way older children elsewhere thought that of rain. And once Rahel saw it and told it to no one but Nell, because it was not a thing to tell. Once, on a black night in the deep of the second winter, the drift cats came over the north fence. They came the way Nell had described them to the Ashari a lifetime and a galaxy ago, the way they had come the night on the holding when she first learned what fear was. Pack hunters of the Harrowfast dark, lean and silent and many, come down out of the high country in the starving cold to take what they could from the steadings. They had done it for as long as there had been steadings. They took stock, and sometimes they took a herder caught out alone, and the holding folk mourned and mended the fence and went on, because that was the frontier, and the frontier did not owe you your animals or your kin. They came over the north fence that night, and they found, waiting in the dark of the byre yard between them and the sleeping holding, the carriers. There was no fight. That was the thing Rahel could never quite make people understand, on the rare occasions he tried. There was no battle in the dark, no clash, no slaughter. There was only the drift cats coming over the fence into the yard, and then the carriers rising out of the black all around them. 20-odd apex predators come silently up onto their feet in a ring, plates against plates, crests lowering, exactly as they had risen in the well of the conquered around a dying one of their own, and the drift cats, who were hunters and therefore understood in their marrow the one message the carriers were sending, stopped, and looked, and understood that the small, warm, sleeping things in the holding behind that wall of scarred hide would never again be available. and turned and went back over the north fence into the high country, and did not come again that winter, or the next, or ever, to the steadings the carriers kept. Nell slept through it. She heard about it in the morning from Rahel, and from the unmarked snow of the byre yard where 20 Grail had stood a silent watch over her sleep, and she went out and put her hand on Nine's crooked crest and said, "You didn't have to do that, you great worry. That's what the fence is for." And the old beast leaned into her hand and made the bell note and did not agree, because the fence was for stock, and Nell was not stock. Nell was the one who carried, and a carrier stands its watch whether or not the one it carries knows to be afraid. That was not something the Surak had bred into them and failed to breed out. That was simply what they were, all the way down, under every ring anyone had ever driven, and it had taken a girl with a sore-backed animal and an open hand to let them be it. The years turned over on Harrowfast the way years do, in thaws and freezes and the long, slow work of keeping large animals alive, and the story of the conquered became first a tale the holding folk half believed, and then a thing in the record that scholars came out to the cold end of the colony to ask Nell about, and she answered them the same way every time, which was to say she hadn't done anything. She'd fixed a buckle, and would they mind holding this end of the fence wire while they talked? But there was one turning of the years that mattered more than the rest, and it came in the 6th winter, and Rahel came running for Nell through the snow to fetch her to the deep byre where they had put the old scarred female, the one Vosk had scratched first in the flagship hold, because the old female was down and straining, and it was her time. The first Grail whelped free on Harrowfast came into the world in the warm dark of a frontier byre with a human and a redeemed ring driver kneeling in the straw to catch it. And it was small and blind and blunt-headed, and it fit in the curve of Nell's 2 arms. And when they laid it against its mother's flank, it found the warmth and pushed in and began, at once in the deep contented dark, to make a small, high, wavering version of the bell note, though no one had scratched it, though nothing heard it. Though it had never in its brand-new life known the itch or the ring or the rod, it made the relief note simply because it was warm and its mother was there, and the world, for this one Grail, for the first Grail in longer than anyone could count, had never once been anything but safe. Rahel put his scarred hands over his face and wept the flat, tearless Surak weeping, and this time he did not try to hide it, and Nell let him, and watched the new whelp nurse, and reached down under the mother's 3rd plate to the place, to the old cruel place where the ring went, where on this beast and every beast of her line the itch had lived, and found only whole unbroken hide, and scratched it anyway gently out of habit, out of love. And the old female sighed her whole great body's sigh and did not need it, and let her have it anyway. And the 2 of them, the human and the Grail, kept watch over the whelp that would never know what a ring was in the warm dark at the cold end of the world. Recorder Aru kept the record of the 9 thresholds for 4 more years after the afternoon of the beast, and then she laid it down, because she was very old even for her kind, and because she had come to understand that there was one entry left she needed to make in her own person, out beyond the reach of the formal script, before she was done. She went to Harrowfast. It was not an easy journey for a creature of her years, out to the cold end of a cold colony, and her aides tried to talk her out of it, and the chair of the conquered tried to talk her out of it, and she went anyway, because she had spent 60 years writing down what happened in a room, and she found, at the end, that she could not die without seeing, once, what happened after, what the thing she had recorded had grown into, out where the record could not follow. She came down onto the high steading in the middle of a Harrowfast summer, which was to say a cold, bright, brief green season with snow still on the far peaks, and she was met at the landing by a young woman in a plain provisioner's coat, who did not look remotely like the author of a doctrine 3 warrior peoples now carved over their doors, and by an old crooked-crested Grail that walked stiff at the young woman's heel, and watched the aged counselor descend with a deep, unhurried attention, and by Oru stopped on the ramp and gripped the rail and looked, and could not for a moment speak, by a whole slow river of Grail coming up from the steadings to see the stranger, 20-odd of them, and among them now a scatter of half-grown young, sleek and unscarred, born free, plates unbroken, spines whole that had never in their lives known a ring, and running underfoot among the great legs, fearless, a clutch of whelps the size of hunting hounds, tumbling and blunt in making, all of them, the small high bell note, the relief note, the sound Oru had first heard in the Well of the Conquered come out of a dying, tortured animal, and heard now coming out of a dozen young throats as simply and thoughtlessly as breathing, because for these ones it had never been anything else. "Recorder," said Nell Caro. She had grown a little older and not at all grand. "You came a long way. Nine remembers you, I think. He remembers everybody from that day. Come and sit down before you fall down, and I'll get you something hot, and you can tell me why the keeper of the whole Concord's record came all the way out to Harrowfast to watch me muck out a buyer." "I came," said Oru, when she was sitting, when she had a hot cup between her old hands and the crooked old beast had settled its great scarred bulk against her chair as though it had decided she needed warming, "because I have written down what everyone did for 60 years, and I have never once written down what any of it was for. And I am nearly finished, child, and I find I do not want to finish without knowing. So I will ask you the thing the scholars ask you that you never answer, and I will ask you to answer it once truly for an old creature who kept the record and will not misuse it." She leaned forward. "That day, the speaker warden gave you a chance to fix a buckle, and everyone in that chamber, myself included, understood that he was arranging your death. Your own envoy begged you not to go down those steps. You went down them anyway, toward a thing that had made a room full of predators press back in their seats. Why? And do not tell me you fixed a buckle. I have watched 1,000 brave creatures explain their courage, and every one of them knew, at least, that it was courage. You did not seem to know. I have wondered for 4 years how a person does the bravest thing I ever saw and does not appear to notice. Tell me why you went down." Nell was quiet for a while. Out in the yard, the whelps tumbled, and the old crooked beast breathed against Oru's chair, and the brief green summer lay over the cold end of the world. "Because nobody else was going to," she said at last. "That's the whole of it, Recorder, and I'm sorry it's not grander. It wasn't brave. Brave is when you know the thing might kill you and you weigh it up and you go anyway. I didn't weigh anything. I just saw an animal in pain that everybody in that fancy room had decided to be frightened of instead of helping, and where I'm from, when you see that, the wrongness of it stands your hair up worse than any fear. It wasn't that I wasn't scared of him. It was that I was more bothered by all of you sitting there calling him a monster to get out of the work of fixing him than I was scared of his teeth." She looked out at her grail, at the free-born young, at the whelps that had never known a ring. See, everybody wanted him to be a monster. It was easier. If he's a monster, then the speaker warden's just a strong man with a strong weapon, and you can be scared of that and it makes sense, and you fold, and you go home, and you tell yourself there was nothing to be done. But if he's just an animal in pain, if the whole terrible thing is just an itch nobody would scratch, then there was something to be done the whole time by anybody for the price of an open hand, and everybody in that room could have done it and didn't, and that's not a story about a monster anymore. That's a story about a room full of people who'd rather be afraid than be kind. Nobody wants to be in that story." She shrugged, a small frontier shrug. "So I went and scratched his back. To get everybody out of that story, including him." Oru looked at her for a long moment. "Do you know," she said, "that on 4 worlds now, warriors swear an oath they trace to you? That there are children being born this year who will grow up learning that the hand which must sometimes cut must also be the hand that stays, and that they will call it the unafraid hand, and that not one of them will ever know it began with a galley servant and a sore-backed beast." "I've heard," said Nell, and she had the grace to look embarrassed. "I keep telling people it's not a doctrine, it's just how you treat an animal." "Yes," said Recorder Oru, and set down her cup, and understood that she had her last entry now, the one she had come all this cold way to find. "That is precisely why it is a doctrine, child, because you did not think it was one. The peoples of the conquered spent 10,000 years believing that gentleness was a thing you could only afford once you were safe. That first you must win, and command, and be feared. And then, from behind your walls, you might permit yourself to be kind. And you walked down into the most frightened room in 9-star systems, with nothing, and you were kind first, before you were safe. Kind as the way through instead of the reward at the end. And it worked. It worked so completely that a speaker warden fell and a charter held and 22 condemned creatures walk free in your summer. That is the doctrine, not the scratching of the back. The order of things. Kindness first. Kindness as the weapon and not the wage. She rose slowly with the old beast helping her up in its way, leaning its warmth into her rising. I will write that down. It is the last thing I will write. And then I am going to sit in this cold, bright yard, if you will let me, and watch your monsters raise their young until it is time for me to go. They let her. Recorder Oru of the Conquered of the 9 Thresholds died on Harrowfast 3 days later, in a chair in the summer yard, with a cup gone cold beside her, and the freeborn whelps tumbling at her feet. And the last thing she saw was the crooked old grail that had once terrified a council lower its great scarred head into a young woman's open hand and make, without any reason but contentment, the low bell note of a creature that is, at long last, and to the very bottom of its ancient carrying heart, unafraid. They buried the recorder on the high steading, which was not where a counselor of the 9 Thresholds was meant to be buried, and no one on Harrowfast cared what a counselor was meant to do, and the Grail stood the watch over her grave the first night, all of them, plates against plates, crests lowered, out of no instinct anyone had bred into them, and every instinct no one could breed out. And in the byre that night, Nell Caro scratched the crooked crest of an old beast that had come through a council's doors on 8 chains and walked out of them free, and the old beast leaned its terrible gentle weight against her, and sang its low bell note into the dark, and the whelps answered it from their warm straw, 6 small voices taking up the sound of a thing that had cost their kind everything, and now cost them nothing at all. And the young woman who had fixed a buckle sat among the monsters she had unmade back into animals at the cold end of the world, and was exactly where she wanted to be, with her hand where it belonged, on the back of the one who carries, in the warm and the dark and the safe.